Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Behind this psychiatric clinic in the city, and in general in the region, have long been bad rumors, like what happens in horror movies, and Michael had certainly heard about it. And when his mother and grandmother found out that he is an excellent student, and a graduate of medical school goes there to work as an orderly, one of them waved his hands. "Grandson, you're the only man left in the family. Don't go there. Michael, you know I'm from an ancient noble family. I may not have 1 million, but I'll find the money to pay for your internship abroad." "Grandma, what money? What abroad? I have to make my own way, just like my grandfather." And the boy nodded his head at the portrait of his grandfather hanging on the wall. And indeed, Michael had someone to look up to. His grandfather was a famous surgeon, and his father, who died in Afghanistan, blew himself up on a mine, saving the military. And so he decided to become a doctor, but not a surgeon like his grandfather and father, but a psychiatrist. Why psychiatry? My mother joked in the first year of school, "But Mom, if the body my grandfather and father studied, so to speak, in detail, then psychiatry is a real field for research, a Klondike." "Yes, you're a researcher. I hope. Psychiatry isn't contagious." "Oh, Mom, don't worry. It's not like it's the flu or anything. Maybe I can find my own unique method of therapy for mentally ill patients. Yeah, and bring people like Chikatilo back into society." "So Adriana, please don't bring it up," said the grandmother, stepping in for her grandson. The case of this serial maniac was then on the rumor, and the whole country was following him. But the mother reacted too painfully to her. Michael understood her because her own sister Adriana, and his own aunt, the only close person, killed by an unknown assailant, and the culprit was never found. The investigator then said that it could be a maniac, but now in many women saw negative elements of society, especially if they stayed in such institutions as their own city institution for the mentally ill. "Mom, you are an adult, and you understand that it is better to treat such people, recognize them as sane, and then pass a sentence, than to spend money on them to keep them in such houses as ours for years. And you're still defending him." The mother was outraged, but she knew her son's temper. "Michael, you're just like your father, just as stubborn. All right, but don't complain to me about anything. Adriana, don't worry. My grandson will complain to his legal grandmother." "You mean me?" Betty gently ruffled the thick red curls of his favorite grandson. "Grandma, but I'm not a boy anymore. Not a boy, but not yet a husband. So listen to your mother, but also to me sometimes." So they lived in the old Tsar's house, where they had a 5-room apartment with its own fireplace and a large library, luxurious balconies, which still kept traces of the old stucco. This house was in the very center of the city, stood on a small hill, and was considered one of the elite in the city. For it, even many rich men and millionaires, even one criminal authority, gave crazy money for the family to sell their apartment. "No way," said Betty's grandmother, who was considered the head of the family, and whose word was final. "This apartment will serve my great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. So just stop asking me stupid questions like if I want to sell the apartment and leave me alone." That's all she said a few years ago to a city criminal mastermind. And strangely enough, but after that they really didn't bother them anymore. They didn't even start organizing invasion raids, as it often happened in those times. That's how they lived. Michael, dreaming of becoming a famous psychiatrist, and his mother and grandmother, whom he madly loved and idolized. No, there were girls in his life, and even an older woman, but he loved few. Yes, there was a crush, even a feeling like love, but nothing serious. He went on studying, falling in love, dating. Now he was interning at a psychiatric clinic in their town. Yes, and talked the most horrible and heartbreaking, up to the fact that their orderlies and doctors have fun with mentally ill beauty, but no one could prove it. "What do you want me to do?" Michael asked his old friend Benjamin, who told him all this. I really have to go over the border, as my grandmother says. But you'd have to sell the last of it. And what would I do in that prosperous Europe? And you realize their methods and ours are probably incompatible. So that's where it stands. I'm already used to the realities of our medicine and psychiatry, in particular, as well as methods of therapy. What's a handful of pills? I'd rather have a shot in the vein, or even for some freaks in general, orbital lobotomy. You're a bloodthirsty Benjamin. I'm way ahead of you. Aha. That's why I went into dentistry, so I could yank my patient's teeth with a vengeance. And the guy was soon making a grimace that made them both laugh. A healthy laugh. Crooked faces like first graders. It was normal. In their practice, doctors, they are such and black humor that help them endure the specifics and difficulties of the job. Often the lack of weekends when there is no one on shifts. And you do all the work for 3 people so you cannot die long, or even go crazy and become like his future charges patients in a psychiatric clinic. Yeah, Ethan, I probably should have chosen dentistry like you, and my grandmother insisted that my senior year I choose dentistry or gynecology. But that's just not my thing, I see, Michael. Then you'll have to go to me for dental care and one of our girls for gynecology. I'll give you a headache. All right, buddy, I gotta go home. I gotta get ready for my first day of private dentistry tomorrow. I'm on the phone for now. Michael nodded, and after shaking hands, they parted ways. He had to go to his mental hospital tomorrow. Then, it was worth it to come home early, to pack a bag, and for once, not to sit in front of the TV until night, to sleep. Already at home he had dinner and brewed himself a fragrant tea. Michael sat down at the computer, an old computer brought from Europe, but still capable of much computer brought to him under the order from a friend of his grandmother for his birthday. When Michael was in his 2nd year of study, and the guy's joy was unbounded. Grandma, this is a real treasure. Luckily, the guy had no limit. And now he sat down at the computer, started the system, and connected the internet. Yeah, the internet is power. The ability to communicate with the world, to learn a lot. And now he decided to keep his own electronic diary of his internship at work, including everything he saw and heard, what methods were used, and what the doctors achieved. Maybe I'll even write a dissertation based on this diary. Not many secrets this asylum hides. Is this your institution for the mentally ill? Grandma came into the room and put a tray with a huge tea and sweet spoons on the table. Yes, Grandma, I'm thinking of keeping a diary. Maybe I'll see something interesting, and there are strange things going on in your almshouse. Grandma, do you know something? Tell me, please. I know something. Betty sat down on her grandson's bed and thought about it. That sometimes I see girls and young women in weird outfits, but they also have ribbons in their hair. Grandma, well, the outfits are ordinary, hospital outfits. Maybe some suits came from humanitarian aid. And the ribbons? Maybe one of the nurses got sick. No, grandson, something else. Outfits. Grandma thought for a moment, and then said, like in adult movies, a dress, short stockings, and netting. Somehow the guy raised an eyebrow in surprise. Strangely, he had passed by this place many times, but he hadn't really paid attention to the patients. His grandmother, on the other hand, did. She looked at her grandson carefully, and then continued. And about the ribbons, they're weird too. How can I explain it to you? Well, what caught your attention? Just tell me the first thing you noticed. The guy felt like a detective, but he was already wondering what his astute grandmother had seen. Betty pressed her lips together and then gave out. They're red with glitter. So what? Grandma, it's bright and beautiful. I guess crazy people like that. I don't know about that. In my time, so to speak, pre-revolutionary ribbons like this were stuffed in the hair of girls of easy virtue in brothels. And here, they'd walk around like that, and they'd be highlighted with ribbons, so to speak. It's not human. You shouldn't make the poor and disadvantaged look like the poor and disadvantaged. Ugh. And also such ribbons flew hair only young and beautiful. Grandma, you're my Agatha Christie. Really, how many times have I walked by and just not paid attention? It's impossible not to pay attention to such an inferential outfit. All right. Well, I take what you said, and I'll pay attention. Maybe I'll uncover some kind of world conspiracy. And the guy smiled his beautiful smile, but he didn't know how close he was to the truth. This hospital was a place for the mildly insane. As the doctors would say, those who didn't require enhanced confinement. That's why the patients could walk by themselves in the equipped yard of the institution, awarded with a fence. But the guy would learn about it later, when he would encounter the most horrible and disgusting thing that could happen in his professional life. Monday turned out to be surprisingly sunny and similar, especially after a night of threatening rain and rain that walled the city. Yes, Michael thought, waking up in the night and looking out the window to rain like that could wash away the whole city and my psychotic charges with it. But the morning was clear and sunny, and there was practically nothing left from the traces of rain, except for broken branches and leaves on the ground. Yeah, it's a lot of work for a janitor, the boy said aloud. That's right, said the janitor of the Sheik grandmother Sophia, who has been cleaning the yard. Since 5 o'clock, she's already cleaned so much, and still waving and waving the broom. Good luck to you. And the guy, throwing his backpack on his shoulder, went to his new place of practice. On the approach to the psychiatric clinic, the guy decided to walk around it a bit, on the other side, so that he could see the place where their patients usually strolled, and to pay attention to what his grandmother was talking about yesterday. Indeed, there were several girls walking in the courtyard, dressed in very revealing outfits with brightly colored ribbons in their hair. But the strangest thing was not only the orderlies, but also the head doctor and his 2 deputies were standing aside. They looked at their charges and smilingly discussed something. And the head doctor was looking at Kathy, a new patient who had been brought in a few days ago, a victim of hypnosis, or rather a failed experiment of a psychopath, a doctor who practiced his trance technique on her. Yeah, the guy thought. Such things happen in the practice of doctors. As the grief doctor told the law enforcers, this method he tried to muffle her inner hunger. What kind of hunger? One of the investigators asked the doctor. Sexual hunger. She was just obsessed with men, always wanting sex. I tried to bring her back to a normal life, although so far I had to cure her with this method by my refinement, to cure her. Or maybe it was just you decorating her like that. I was saving her from herself. The doctor was sure he was doing good. But, as Michael thought to himself, having heard the girl's story and the doctor's testimony, he was no less crazy than his victim, whom he had turned into a vegetable. Yes, thought the new orderly from one prison, or rather office, psycho, experimenter to the clinic. Or rather, a study, a psycho, an experimenter in a clinic where she was looked upon as a subject of pleasures and possible molestation. Well, if you've got your eye on her, I'm gonna have to keep an eye on you, Kathy. Now I realize my grandmother was right about something. You don't dress patients like that. This isn't a catwalk, it's a clinic. Michael took out a pack of cigarettes and smoked, even though he'd only dabbled before. As his downstairs neighbor, Uncle Benjamin, who'd been in the camps for years, would say. He was translating product, also a colorful type. The guy remembered about him. But in reality, as he was an Urka and a political prisoner in the past owned such a 3-room apartment. Michael even once asked him jokingly, who will get your chambers and jacuzzi? To which he replied, squint your eyes at him. Don't be jealous. I won this house with my teeth. And the neighbor showed his not too healthy strong teeth. Don't look at my teeth. I can still do a lot. And the apartment is my mother's inheritance, not the state's. Believe me. Uncle Benjamin, but you don't have children. Who told you I don't? I had a daughter, but she died in childbirth. So there's only one beloved grandson. But why doesn't he visit you? Where is he? Do you even know? Because he lives abroad. My daughter married an Arab. She fell in love and went to the Emirates. To tell the truth, she lived like a cheese in butter. I wouldn't give her that. But I guess you have to pay for everything. And I guess she paid the price when she gave birth. I'm sorry, Uncle Benjamin, I really didn't know. Hold on. There's a grandson. Have you even seen him? Yes, he came to my daughter's funeral. To her grave, to be exact. She converted to Islam and was buried on the day she died. So I only got the grave. I'm sorry. You're welcome. My grandson's growing up and my daughter's husband calls me and shows me his grandson via video link. He keeps asking me to come over, but I can't leave the house. Yes, and here I am among neighbors as my own and smiling through tears. Neighbor went to his apartment. Michael stood smoking under the fence net and did not understand why he remembered him. But fate would once again bring the neighbors together in this case, albeit in a very unusual way. And now Michael stood smoking, looking, and could not make a step and continue his way. Maybe throw it to hell under his nose, said the guy. And then he almost jumped. On his shoulder lay the hand of William, the lead doctor, clinic, and supervisor of Michael's practice, who had seen the guy get off at the bus stop, how he had smoked, stopping under an old lime tree. And as he watched a group of paramedics walking in the courtyard of patients of doctors, laughing them among themselves, probably at some oily joke. Who are you gonna leave? Certainly not the practice at our fun and games place, but I think you're overdoing it on the fun and games. No, it's definitely that kind of black doctor humor. It is so, sort of so humor. The doctor smiled and took his ward under his arm and led him towards the psychiatric hospital, slowly but surely moving him towards the horrors that were going on inside its walls. The doctor had already made the decision to either involve Michael in his games or simply deprive him of his sanity if he did not agree to participate. Why him? It's simple. Michael is a new man in their collective one not so long ago, by chance, and he's strong for his age, plus handsome. Here is such a boy handsome, which is exactly suitable for filming spicy movies. Already in the clinic, the head doctor Noah and William took him through all the buildings, floors, and wards. Yes, the views are not the best, and emotions are not the brightest. Why should he be surprised, though? He knew where he was going. Michael was tormented by his grandmother's reasoning, but he knew if he asked that question directly, he'd be laughed at. But at the most, he'd get suspended. And the guy would never find out. Noah asked Michael over tea at the resident. There are all sorts of rumors about this clinic, in particular, mystical rumors. What do you have to say about that? Oh, Michael, you're a medical student, but you talk like a philology student who wants folklore. Or are you afraid of the ghost of the old empress or mother? The mother superior who drowned a truck in our pond at night. There's even a pond here. The boy's amazement was unparalleled. How long has he lived here in this town? I knew of clinics in the neighborhood, but the fact that there's also a pond. Remember the old movie about the Three Musketeers? Well, we have a lively pond just like that. It was organized by the previous head doctor. His wife worked as a landscape designer. So they set it up. We have a lily pond here. It's beautiful. There were fish swimming in it, but I guess our climate didn't suit them. They died out over the winter. But our patients don't care whether they're fish or lilies. And Ethan, an orderly with huge fists and a face resembling a tango arena, laughed as Michael's laughter made him shudder, and the doctors simply did not pay attention to him. And why do they tolerate such people in the clinic? Although on the other hand, there are some violent people who can't be subdued without physical force. Yeah, But Ethan's rudeness sometimes got to Michael, as did the thought of having to work with someone like that. "Ethan, you show Michael to your office, where he can change his clothes, leave his things in the lockers and all that. He's only here for a couple months, so to speak, a couple months internship. But it's still got to be determined." Ethan nodded his head and waved his huge fist at Michael. Michael didn't show his displeasure. Let it be. A couple of months could be tolerated, and then he was promised to be taken to the second city as a staff psychiatrist, so he didn't worry about it too much. Michael obediently went down to the basement with Ethan and went to the very back of the clinic. Here, the orderlies had set up a room for a locker room and a kind of sports corner where you can hit a punching bag and play chess and dominoes. Don't be shy. Michael, take any locker that's not open. We have a lot of open seats right now, so let's get settled in. Why do so few people want to work at the clinic? Michael started asking questions from afar. I mean, who wants to hang out with a psycho? A lot of people think of it as a contagion. Being a psycho too. I just don't know any other job. Although at one time, just like you, I studied medicine. What did you study for? An orderly, that's what I studied. And my uncle put me to work here. My uncle. He's Noah. You've seen him. He's our chief of medicine. Good acquaintances, the boy thought, but he didn't say anything. Michael changed his clothes and began to get ready for his shift. The shift went relatively smoothly, and the next morning, the guy threw his backpack on his shoulders and left the clinic building. The sun was shining brightly, and there was nothing to portend any trouble, and all the things he had changed his mind about yesterday. Michael, it seemed like a fairy tale or fantasy. But really, what kind of fairy tales are fairy tales? We live in our developed world with computers, cameras on every corner. Even if there was something going on here, it would have been made public a long time ago. Michael, good morning. William called out to the guy and extended his hand to greet him and got straight to the point. How was your shift? Smoke. I don't smoke. Thank you. Yesterday it was just a dalliance, but the shift. Thank you. Everything went smoothly. William, can I make a personal request if I'm not interrupting something more important? Sure. Yes, of course. Anything I can do. Could you show me that pond you told me about yesterday? Wow. I guess you got caught up in the story last night. Come on. It's in the backyard. I'll show you around. I gotta be honest, you can't see it from the street. It took me a while to find it myself. It's so hidden, it's creepy. Is this place really inhabited? The center of Izhevsk. The doctor looked at him with a slight chuckle and said nothing, but waved his hand and led him deep into the park area of the hospital. Yeah, it's a bit of a wilderness, and that the most strange noise of cars from the street was not heard, although the clinic itself was located at the crossroads of quite busy central city roads. How quiet is it? And strangely enough, you can't hear much traffic from the road. Yes, you're right, Michael. You've noticed it's quiet. And here's the twig itself, and the head doctor spread the branches with his hands and let the boy go ahead. It's beautiful. The four. Michael opened a pond, laid out of stones behind burned black lilies, around which willows grew. And what was the most amazing thing? There were several statues in antique style of girls, hunting or carrying jugs on their shoulders. He had not seen such statues for a long time. Oh, it's beautiful. And notice the angle and the shot. You could even make a movie. What kind of horror movie have you seen in our cellars? There's no such thing as a cellar. Why? There are some. Yes, imagine that. And they lead to the local Cathedral of the Transfiguration, which is across the street from us. Are these cellars or cellars? I don't know. They lead to the monastery, and they say the monks at our clinic have the right people. And all because it wouldn't occur to anyone to look for a healthy person in a mental institution. Then there's been some kind of collapse in some places. Now these passages are impassable. That's for sure. No one's gonna come in here willingly. And then he noticed on the opposite bank the figure of a girl in a racy outfit. Kathy, he remembered her, because she had been brought here on the day when he had come to see the head doctor and applied for an internship at this clinic. The girl herself was not in the state she was in at the time. She was screaming at the doctors that the psychiatrist wanted to kill her. She's hearing voices and everything. That Kathy suffers from inner voices and a hypertrophied sex drive. Well, that's what her previous doctor said. Who knows? So far, the girl hasn't said a word. Why is she dressed like that? Short dress, fishnet stockings, ribbon in her hair. You know, Michael, it's one of my methods of letting the patient choose what they want. And by the way, where'd you get that outfit? That's a good question. Like many theatrical costumes, it was left to us by a theater. Exactly the theater. The director was jailed for some dark deeds, he and his wife. And the actors just ran away. And since the theater was near us, it's not a waste. And they were all dressed like royalty. Yes, imagining you as Henry Valois or Peter the Great. Michael, you're joking. But by the way, we had a wonderful carnival night here on New Year's Eve. And there was even a story about us in the paper. I hope it wasn't in a good context that a disguised Napoleon was walking around town claiming to be the real chief medical officer. No, we're all understanding people with a sense of humor. So we just hung around the Christmas tree. That one over there, by the way, by the entrance. And you know, people even took pictures with us on New Year's Eve. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for the tour. I'm gonna go home and get some sleep. Thursday again for 24 hours. Michael, don't try too hard. You can't do all the work. You're a young guy. I nodded my head. But I thought to myself, no, I'm going to get you out of this. I think you're hiding something. Dear head doctor, but you don't need to know that. I had dinner tonight and sat down at the computer. Michael quickly made the first entries in his diary and then began to look for information about the local clinic. And indeed, there was a lot of information about it. Strangely enough, there was a lot of information about it, and with a very negative connotation. Murders, suicides, and strange deaths of both patients and doctors. Yes, there was a lot to work on and a lot to find out. But it was Kathy that bothered him the most. And he thought to himself, why not keep a sneaky eye on her room? The girl herself. Not without reason the head doctor was looking at her with such olive eyes. Grandma, the boy called out to his grandmother. Why did you shop like that? You won't let me watch my favorite TV show. What did you want? Grandma, I saw a girl at the clinic today. She was a victim of an incompetent hypnotist and suffered as a result. But that's not the point. She was wearing the outfit you mentioned, short dress, stockings, and a sash. Not surprising. One of your executives must have had their eye on her. I mean, she's new. She's a young girl too. I take it. So you're going to steal her? No, Grandma, I just want to keep an eye on her room. It's on the first floor, so it won't be a problem. To do anything, you have to have proof. That's what I'm required to do. Really, Michael, I'm old. I'm not going to play Sherlock Holmes with you. I'm more of a Mrs. Hudson. Grandma, that's not what I mean. Just cover for me in front of Mom. I'm gonna go over to the clinic tonight, stake out the windows, so to speak. I found a military A in Grandpa's closet. Okay, if anything, I'll tell Mom you're home already asleep. She's on call today anyway, so she won't be home. But you're my grandson, please. Don't get into any trouble. Okay. Michael nodded his head and poked the old lady on the cheek. He went back to his computer. What's going on at the clinic? How was your shift? The old woman was still interested in how true or not the rumors were. The rumors about the asylum. Yeah, Grandma. It's okay. I told you it was nothing like that. No, it's not. Our head doctor showed me the old pond on the grounds today. the one with the black lilies. Grandma didn't tell me about it. I went there and saw it because the wife of the former head doctor was my friend, and the pond itself is her creation. But the doctor didn't tell you that in the same pond they found the wife of the former one drowned. The guy shook his head, looked at his grandmother in surprise, but there's knee-deep water, and that's it. And this is the strangest thing. Her body was lying with her head in the water. She was submerged in the water, but her arms and legs were lying flat along her torso. They took a sturdy, adequate soldier and put her face down. That's all. And then they found water from the pond in his lungs. No signs of violence on the body. If that's what you're asking, it's odd that she came in, lay down, and swallowed the water to death. Drowned of her own volition. The guy was being sarcastic. But looking at the expression on his grandmother's face, he immediately faltered. Betty did not tolerate unnecessary words and jokes, and therefore immediately warned her grandson. Yes, Michael, death is strange. But if she did it herself, then she had a reason. And maybe even her own husband is the same as your current boss's overbearing. There's nothing to cure them. Maybe, under the old doctor, he and his brothers also had fun with innocent girls, and his wife found out and drowned them both. So, what of it? Or maybe who drowned them? But really, she won't become a ghost of a ghost, will she? Maybe she wouldn't. But believe me, there's something scary going on out there. And I'll tell you honestly, this new girl isn't worth the danger she's bringing upon herself. Trust me. The Brotherhood of Doctors, it's like that. Everyone protects each other. And even if they do something to her, that you can get to the bottom of it. But understand, a doctor will not testify against a doctor. So get on your nerves and leave her in there. At least I'll get her out and save her that way. All right. Michael, don't yell. I hear you. I accept your position. But I'm trying to warn you. You're putting yourself in a lot of danger. I understand all that. That's why I'm telling you where I'm going and what I intend to do. Betty nodded and stood up, heading for the door. She was worried about her grandson, but she realized she couldn't keep the young and hot guy away. So the woman simply stood on the doorstep and turned and said to Michael, "What if you take Uncle Benjamin, our neighbor from the second floor, to help you? He's old, but he's lean. And with his criminal record, he'd be a big help. I'll think about it. But it's not a bad idea. Although I'll tell you right away, I'll have to see for myself, do some recon, and then I'll tell them what's going on. Even if I go to him now, what can I say? Uncle Benjamin is there in the clinic raping women and many other things. And he'll tell me. Prove it. Just words. And I don't really believe it all myself. Just because a place is weird and old doesn't mean you can't ring all the bells. Yeah, there's too many girls. There's too many crazy people. And there's too many masquerades. But it's all right." And the grandmother left the room, closing the door a little behind her. Michael leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. Uncle Benjamin is a criminal, but the grandmother is right. His experience and his nose for crime might help him. And an extra set of hands and eyes can always help. But first you have to go and see for yourself, and then you can go to your neighbor. All right, let's get ready. Michael threw a flashlight and a bottle of water into his backpack. Binoculars with good German optics can take a camera. What for? Basically, there's a cell phone. You can take video and photos with it. Okay, that's fine for the first time. Anyway, I'm not going to go in there. And throwing it on his shoulders, Michael went out into the corridor and began to study. The sounds Betty came out of his room and looked at his offspring carefully. You're coming. Yes, Grandma. Don't worry. I've got the phone, but don't call. I'll call you if I need to. In the meantime, lock it up. I think I'll be on the train in a couple of hours. 20 minutes to get there. An hour and a half and back. 20 minutes. So look, it'll be 3 hours. All right. Grandson, but please be careful. If anything happens to me, your mother will rip my head off." Michael smiled at his favorite person and kissed her. He went outside. It was getting dark. What's so surprising? After work he washed up, then ate and slept, and now full of strength can and observe. The guy smiled, thought to himself that he should have gone not to the doctor, but probably to the investigators. Here is a confirmation of his words. A patrol car passed by and lit up the road with flashing beacons, but it alarmed the guy. No, not the car itself, not the flashing lights. It was the fact that the policeman stopped it around the corner and got out quietly, covering the door. They slammed it shut, as usual, quietly slipped through the hole in the fence of the psychiatric clinic, and went just as quietly, whispering among themselves. Wow! The cops are also in business, and the young medic's bewilderment had no limit. Did these columns, as his grandmother would say, come here too? Wow! Now, it's not just medical malpractice anymore. It's a group of gangs. And that's what he's encountered in practice. Come on. Maybe he just made a mistake, and the police came here on a signal, so to speak, to check what's going on here. But still, these two were acting weird, uncharacteristic. Michael slowly went in the direction of the secret eye. In the fence, jumped in the chassis, hiding behind the dense vegetation, and abundantly growing along this fence. That was a plus right now, and it wasn't exactly a starry night. So the guy slowly crept toward the ominous, overhanging park clinic. This 3-story old pre-revolutionary building was an eyesore in the city. It was going to be demolished long ago, moving the facility to the outskirts. But apparently, it wasn't worth it for the high-ranking officials to go there in search of hidden pleasures. "Come on, come in here," quietly said one policeman, and let the other one inside. The basement. Wow, they got the basement entrance open. I wonder who's on shift today. An old orderly with a long history of alcohol abuse, or Liam. Another one of the orderlies with a huge fist. When Michael himself asked about the door to the basement and the padlock, the head doctor secretly smiled and said, "This is the entrance to our basement paradise. And is it like growing marijuana there?" Michael decided to make a joke, but I guess the joke didn't work. The doctor looked at him sideways and said it wasn't pot. It was something else, but it's too early for him to know. Everything will show and tell later. And now they just let outsiders into this forbidden paradise. Maybe they are part-time. Security guards? Michael chuckled under his nose and began to approach the clinic building even more quietly. The windows of the wards on the first floor glowed with a dim light. It was the way the duty lights burned. And the light itself was enough to see what was going on in the wards. The guy intuitively approached the window of the room of the new patient, Kathy, and from surprise, almost dumbfounded on the spot. Guy saw her sitting on the bed, dressed in a short schoolgirl dress and with bows in her hair. Yeah, the guy almost whistled in surprise. And apparently, the girl heard his exclamation and looked out the window. Michael intercepted her gaze for a second. He was devastated. Apparently, she'd been pre-sedated with sedatives. But at the same time, there was a silent plea for help. But then, Liam and the doctor in charge entered the room, and the boy sat down instantly so as not to be seen. Michael sat under the window and listened intently to what was going on in the room itself. He heard the footsteps of 2 men and the creaking of a bed. Then the words of the head doctor. "Hello, Kathy. You're already dressed as well as you can be. Now let's go down to the basement with me and Liam. You'll find a lot of interesting things there." The basement where the 2 policemen went. Apparently, they had some sort of organized pleasure nook down there. And that's where they took her, drugged her with psychotropics. But what to do? The guy quietly sank to the ground and put his hands around his head. What to do? What to do? And then the front door creaked and Michael squeezed into the ground. 3 men came out of them and headed towards the basement. Good night was dark, and the yard of the clinic was not illuminated. Therefore, he simply was not noticed. But only the girl turned back, looked in his direction, and cried. Tears rolled silently down her face. Michael heard Noah begin to quietly soothe the girl and told the orderly, "Lie him at the school, to her in the basement for another dose of sedative. We didn't want her to wake up at the right moment." And the chief of police wasn't happy with his new doll. "Yeah, sure, Noah. Let's get her in and give her a quick shot." And the trio began to make their way down to the basement. Michael had one single desire: to break into the basement and snatch Kathy out of the hands of doctors and cops. But he realized how impossible that would be. No, he was not intimidated by the company, the doctors and the cops, to do their dark deeds. But he realized they'd just smash him there. And that would be it. And no one will know where his grave is. Call the militia. What will he say there? The head doctor and a policeman raping a mentally ill patient won't believe him. And even if they do, what's next? But the brigade will arrive on a call. And what? Nothing. If the police come to such costume parties, it means that the management is aware of it, and at least the case will be closed. At the most, they can either kill him in the same basement and bury him here or put him in jail for something. I mean, even if it's for abusing Kathy. So think, Michael, think. Maybe you're imagining things. Yeah. And the cops are here for nothing. But at that very moment, the basement door opened and a policeman came running out. "Vasia," he shouted, "I've been away for a couple of hours. There's an emergency at the police station, but I'll be back later. Leave me that girl for later." And the policeman rushed to the car. The guy heard the engine roar and the tires skid across the sand. But the strangest thing was that from the cellar no one answered him, and no one had ever closed the door. It wasn't locked. It's called come in. Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Michael rushed to the cellars and started to go down the stairs, listening to every sound. But he heard nothing, neither footsteps nor any other sounds. There were supposed to be at least 4 people down there. And they certainly weren't singing lullabies, but maybe it was for the best. The boy opened the cellar door and slipped inside. The corridor was sparsely lit, and there was a pantry open right next to the entrance. The guy peeked into it just in case, to make sure there was no one there. And in case of emergency, he could hide in this room. Yes, there are shelves and bears in principle a place for a hiding place. But at that very moment, at the end of the corridor, footsteps were heard. It was the guest of the night police and the head doctor. The boy immediately recognized the figure of his superior. They were talking quietly about something, and as they approached, the boy could hear what they were talking about. What he heard made him not just overcome, but terrified to the point of truly experiencing fear not only for the poor girl, but for his own life. "Noah, thank you for the welcome. But you see, the warden's gone. We've had an emergency at the council since this morning. The commission's here, so we're saving Kathy for dessert, so to speak. Yes, you understand correctly. Everything is normal. No excesses or incidents. No one is interested in anything. Yes, in principle, everything's fine. Except we got a new orderly coming in for an internship. We didn't apply for the internship, but he did. So, they're interested in the job, and the clinic in particular. Why are our patients dressed so oddly? Of course, like you said, it's all been blamed on the tour and the theater we had a year ago, and then they disbanded it. But I don't think he believed it. So what do you suggest? Maybe we should press him a little so he doesn't stick his nose where it doesn't belong. No, I think I can handle it. And you know, it's normal to be questioned about our clinic." Michael listened and realized it was about him. His breath cleared, and he even found it hard to breathe. And as luck would have it, the couple stopped near the open door to the storeroom, where the new Employee was hiding behind the racks with his colleagues. The policeman looked into the storeroom, but seeing nothing, quietly said to the head doctor, "Okay, Noah, let's postpone our sit-downs for the time being. Lie down while holding this girl. The chief liked her, and the school drill outfit matches. We'll be there in a couple days. In the meantime, we'll be in touch. Call me if you need anything." The head doctor didn't say anything. He escorted the guest outside and returned a couple minutes later. Michael, all these minutes, which seemed like hours to him, sat and did not breathe, although his heart was pounding frantically and was ready to jump out of his chest. And this breathing and heartbeat, it seemed to the lad to be striking a bell in the silence. But there was nothing he could do about it. The boy heard the head doctor pass by his cell and head deep into the corridor, muttering something to himself. After a few minutes, he looked out of the door and, seeing no one, slipped out into the street. He breathed in the cool air of the night and took a few deep breaths in and out and began to make his way toward the dead vine. At the fence, Michael walked slowly, not even looking around, being in slight shock at everything he saw. What could be going on in there? What did I see there? Nothing. Just heard the doctor and the cops talking about something. But I don't know what they were talking about. Maybe it's some kind of videotape as part of a police investigation. The guy was trying to drown out the thoughts that kept popping into his head, and he'd heard of costume parties like this a long time ago. But to have minds devoid of girls and women take part in it, there was no such thing. All right, who am I kidding? Trying to fool. There's definitely something going on in that basement that's scary and illegal. And it's got to stop. Poor girls. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. He'd have to go to Uncle Benjamin. That old bastard will surely tell him what to do, won't he? How? He'll help. The guy did not notice how he reached the house, how he went up to the floor and opened the doors with his keys, closing them quietly. Michael leaned against the wall and from powerlessness and experience simply slid to the floor. Grandma came out of the room at that moment and flicked the light switch. The bright light blinded the guy. And realized, "Grandma, why are you awake?" He tried to look normal, but apparently the expression on his face told the old lady everything. "Why? You want me to tell you why? What happened? Tell me." "You're white as chalk." "Grandma, I don't want to. I wish I was like this right now. Come on, go take a shower to wash off the negativity. Then we'll go to the table. I spared a cutlet, and I'll pour you one of my own." The guy did not argue, and simply went to the bathroom, pulled off all the clothes and scattered them on the way. When in the bathroom heard the sound of water, Betty collected the guy's things and threw them into the washing machine. "No dirt to lay around. I'll wash everything tomorrow." When Michael came out of the bathroom, there was a late dinner and a bottle of tincture on the table. The woman poured him a shot and handed it to him without saying anything. Nor did the grandson ask anything. He took it quietly and knocked it over. All at once. "Take the cutlets, mashed potatoes, salad. Let's eat." The guy sat down at the table without saying a word. He poured himself a second shot of olive and tipped it just as quietly and started on the homemade cutlets. He ate and thought, should he tell his grandmother of his suspicions? But Betty was not so foolish, as modern young people might think. I take it Kathy had gotten into the local psychiatric brothel and was simply being kept on psychotropic drugs. Michael chewed and nodded his head and simply couldn't drop a word. Not because he was eating, but because he was choked with emotion, and he didn't want to upset his grandmother. But his grandmother was not stupid and immediately realized everything as soon as his grandson entered the house. "You know, grandmother, there are not only doctors involved, there are also the police, and most likely, the very top. They came here today, twirled around and left. It's like an emergency in the department. So they didn't stay the night. And this girl, And then Michael shook from the experience. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he couldn't stop. How could they do that? It's not just they're renting prostitutes who know what they're in for and where they're going. And all this with mentally ill women. How so? Michael, I get it. That's why I told you not to go there, but you wouldn't listen. And now you've got to figure out how to deal with it. You're not going to go to the police. You said it yourself. The whole chain of command is tied up. So what do we do? You can't go with a machine gun against everyone. You don't have to do it yourself. I told you. Go talk to our neighbor tomorrow. You know, the one below us, Benjamin. He's a thief. He's old school, I think. Plus, he's got a grudge against the police. So if he doesn't help, he'll certainly tell me what to do and who to turn to. The guy nodded his head and poured himself another olive. He drank and couldn't taste it. Slowly he digested all that he had seen and heard, thinking how he should proceed. But Babushkina's spit turned out to be quite strong, and already in half an hour the guy was pecking his nose. Go to bed, my sorrow. Tomorrow mother will come, and you with red eyes sleep, and then I'll cook for you for the evening. Pour the stuffed cabbage. With all this good stuff you'll go and ask your neighbor for advice. Grandma, thank you. I'm going. Michael only laid his head on the pillow, as he was immediately dreaming. He slept and did not dream, though emotions so and so raged inside him. But apparently the young body could handle giving his head a rest. Indeed, he slept until almost lunchtime. And when he got up at 12 o'clock, he found no one home in the kitchen. All he caught was a note from his mother. Say, lunch on the table from his grandmother, stuffed cabbage in her purse, cash in the fridge in the back. We had a snack in Russia too. Michael went down to the second floor and called Uncle Benjamin's apartment. He didn't open the door right away, but he wouldn't let the guys in. Michael, do you want something? Uncle Benjamin, my grandmother gave you Golutsov, and he pointed to the bottle. And then I'd like to talk to you about a sensitive matter. The old one stomped on the doorstep. He liked Betty's stuffed cabbage, and it wasn't nice to say no to a neighbor. It wasn't proper. But he had guests he didn't want Michael to meet. The guy heard he had a stranger as a guest, maybe the lady of his heart, and he's here with his own problems. Uncle Benjamin, if I'm interrupting, I'm sorry, but can I come back later? Yes. Michael, I'm sorry, guest, come back at 8 o'clock. And here's Betty. A special thank you. Her stuffed cabbage is a work of art. Benjamin nodded his head and closed the door gently. Yeah, the stuffed cabbage and cash came in handy. There would be something to feed and drink an old friend. He came unexpectedly, and frankly speaking, the skull's visit surprised Benjamin and made him a little wary. And what does the skull need from old Kogan? And a vagabond? Yeah, maybe our old friend stomping on the doorstep for starters. Hopefully, the doorstep isn't where friends have a business conversation. Oh no, sure, come on in. Except there's nothing to buy. But I did not come here to eat. The restaurant will not feed. If you want strong tea with your girlfriends, I won't refuse. You owe me tea and my girlfriends. When Benjamin went to put the kettle on, the doorbell rang. It was Michael, but not the landlord. Neither did his guests know about it. Both were wary. But since Benjamin had long since retired and felt no guilt, he boldly opened the door. After talking to his neighbor for a few minutes, he returned to the room with the fools and the cash. Oh, I see the delivery service is working perfectly, joked the skull. Yes, in the face of the upstairs neighbor. He came in to talk some business, so I brought this to butter the old man up. But I asked him to wait till tonight. In the meantime, try these homemade stuffed cabbage. By the way, and cherry is a delight. The men sat down at the table, poured a shot glass each, and, having drunk, had a snack. And how not to drink, because it would make the conversation easier. Benjamin looked at the old thief in the law and quietly asked, what brought you to me? You didn't just come. 10 years after our last case. Yes, I did. And for good reason. I'll tell you right off the bat. I was put in charge of this town not that long ago, but I think you already know that. Now, I've heard rumors that young girls and women have been going missing in this town for the last few years. Well, you can blame it on anything, although all roads lead to your local mental institution. You know what I'm getting at? Yeah, I've heard bad things about her too, Benjamin said, and poured another round of shots. But how can I tell you, Skull? They're just rumors. You know, you can't do anything without proof. That's true. But in addition to the fact that young girls have been brought into this almshouse and treated for whatever reason, the cops have been frequenting it in recent months. They probably set up a brothel there together with the doctors and have fun there. And how not to party? It's a hell of a roof. Skull, are you sure? The old watcher nodded his head and threw a piece of fool into his mouth. He poured himself and his friend a shot for cream. What was there to say? Home-cooked food, still, that delicacy and luxury. And he, as an old thief who had spent most of his life in colonies and prisons, understood that. But that's not what we're talking about now. The daughter of a street Petersburg authority figure is missing. And so far all roads lead here. You see, Alex's daughter is missing. Well, you remember him. He was on my team. Then he retired. He's got a family, but his daughter's missing. And all roads lead here to this mental institution. Yeah, and you said she could be in that new house. What about him? What did he do? He's been raising his own, and he's almost filed a police report. But nothing. Benjamin sat and thought about it. He really heard from his friends that in the last couple of years young beauties began to disappear and that it was the doctors or the cops who were involved. But that was talk, and no more evidence. But if the daughter of an authority figure has disappeared and the tracks led here, that's serious. Skull, couldn't it be a banal showdown? It's been speculated. But no, that's not it. Is that why I need your help? How long have you lived near this fine establishment in this town? Take a good look, Skull. By the way, Michael, but the guy who came in the other day with these fools, he works there as an orderly. How does he work? I think he's been there a while. But I asked him. That's what we decided. But in the evening, Benjamin didn't even have to ask the guy. 8 o'clock sharp. He was already sitting in his kitchen and drinking strong and sweet tea, which the owner had brewed, and put in front of the guy. Come on, complain. Who has offended? What happened? Yes, you see, I only have a son-in-law here. You know, I finished the basic course in my medical school, and now I'm practicing. But guess what? I know our psychiatric clinic. I've complained before. And I warned you, it's gonna be tough out there. But what happened? And by the way, I have a couple questions for you about your psych ward. Later, though. Now, come on, tell me. So my grandmother and some other people said there was something going on there, but I didn't believe it. But my grandmother pointed out one thing to me. They dress. The young and beautiful in short dresses and stockings and braid their hair. And do you know why? Michael looked at his neighbor, and in his throat stood. He couldn't say it out loud, but he knew he needed help, at least in advice, at least in deed. The old thief sat and looked at the guy, realizing that he not only needed to speak out and ask for advice, but the conversation itself was going in the right direction for him. You see, Uncle Benjamin, they raped them there. Maybe they're even videotaping the whole thing. The guy just gasped at his own words and the realization that Kathy was there and what could be done to her. He took a breath and continued. That's why I came. I've heard about this clinic for a long time, but last night I decided to go and look around. But in short, Uncle Benjamin, I saw 2 cops going down to the basement, as well as our head doctor as an orderly, and they were taking a new girl down there. But Apparently the cops had some kind of emergency, and they left quickly. But most importantly, I heard one of them telling our head doctor to leave the girl for later. The guy briefed me on the whole thing and looked at the reaction of the old tramp. On his face was read not only surprise, but also interest, especially a last news. Kathy was the name of the daughter of a street Petersburg authority who was considered missing or even killed, almost by order of the opposing gangs. And what does this girl look like? Tell me. I'm sorry, I'm asking you this for a reason. A friend of mine had a missing daughter. Her name was Kathy, and it all leads back to our town. Maybe it's her. The guy thought about it for a minute and started describing her in detail. But the most important feature the guide remembered was a scar on her left ankle. Then he listened and couldn't believe his ears. He knew the street Petersburg authority Alex and his daughter, and the very scar the girl had gotten, falling from a tree. His heart stabbed. Wow, that's how you find an authority figure's missing daughter. That's lucky. But maybe it's not her at all. Michael, why don't you show her to me? But we'll go tonight, when the patients are out on the street. Show it to me gently. But in terms of what's being done to them, we'll have to get into that basement, look in the nooks and crannies. Can you get the key? Michael shook his head negatively, but Benjamin just waved his hand. What can I expect from you? He went into the room and rummaged through the closet. A set of thieves' lockpicks was there. Basically, we can look inside this basement at night. Okay, Michael, when are you going to work? Tomorrow. Well, we'll go together early in the morning. You'll show me from afar the basement, and then if you're psychotic, sorry, patients are walking around. Point your finger at Kathy. They don't go out this early. They only let them out at lunchtime and in the evening. Okay, well, just show me the basement, and then at lunchtime, I'll come to that walk, and you can show me Kathy. But why? Uncle Benjamin, you think she's your friend's daughter. I knew for a fact she was no fool. From your description, it looks like it, but I'll have to see for myself. So, Michael, it would help if you showed her to me. As for proof, I can pick any lock. Just dibs. It's our secret. I'll look, and then, if there's anything interesting, we'll figure out how to proceed. Michael was fine with that, and he calmed down a bit. But then I asked him the same question. What if there is nothing there that can be caught on? Michael, you're like a little child. I know exactly what to look at and what to look for. And then we'll set up a camera and film their antics. The old bastard chuckled, but when he looked at the boy's face, he stopped short. Yeah, I guess he wasn't laughing. Although, if you think about it, it's the height of cynicism to do such a thing as people in white coats and the police cover for them. Yeah, I got a special thing for the police. Plus, if this Kathy brothers thank me very much. Michael, I'm sorry. I guess years in places not so remote haven't made a saint out of me. But I do feel sorry for your charges, especially since some of them were just stabbed with antidepressants and sedatives, and now they're doing this. But that's okay. I'll take a look. We'll set up cameras if we have to. Then I'll report everything to the gang, and they will disperse your gang in no time. Michael listened and understood that the neighbor could do all this. But how to get the whole gang out? Uncle Benjamin. But understand the proof for your friends is good, but the case must be taken to court. Michael, do you take me for a fool? Imagine for a minute, if we're looking for my friend's daughter, he'll make such a scandal. He'll involve everyone he can. Lawyers and press, law enforcement, you name it. But most importantly, your head doctor and his cronies won't get away. That's what I need. Michael closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. For some reason, he believed this old jailer, although he realized that Benjamin was not without sin. All right, Benjamin, let me show you the loophole in the fence at the entrance tomorrow, and then the cellar itself. And you can come to this fine by 12 o'clock. That's when our patients take their lunchtime walks. I'll try to show you Kathy. Benjamin nodded and sipped from a cup of strong tea. He was satisfied with today. Helping Skull and freeing Kathy would be a big plus for him, and he'd been wanting to mess with the cops for a long time. If they were really nasty in that asylum. Michael got up and went home. It was almost 22 o'clock on the clock. It was necessary to wash and sleep. Tomorrow was a crucial and decisive day. In the morning, Benjamin, already 6:45, stood near the entrance and smoked. He put on a dark, unremarkable suit cap and dark glasses. He pulled up a cigarette and thought about the situation with Michael, Kathy, and this almshouse in general. Uncle Benjamin, hello. Michael greeted his neighbor and extended his hand to him. The man flashed him a cigarette and shook his hand. Quietly, Michael said, "Just call me Benjamin without uncle. I feel like an old man. I'm not young, but I'm not an old man at heart." "All right. You ready to go?" He nodded, and the men walked slowly in the direction of the psychiatric clinic, talking among themselves. Like old friends, Michael walked and looked around so as not to catch the eye of the head doctor or one of the orderlies. There was no need to draw attention to himself. Approaching the fence of the psychiatric clinic, Michael looked around carefully and pointed with his hand to the entrance to the basement. "This is the basement, and there's an opening further along the fence into the grounds. Just right for you. Just right. Now let's move on." They went further, passing the very gap in the fence, which was so advantageously disguised by the leaves of wild ivy and vines. Michael looked around again and pointed to the platform. "In front of the main entrance. This is our so-called women's quarters, and it's where our patients walk from 12 until lunchtime. If anything I can say from my observation, Kathy often likes to stand under that London tree, which is closer to the road. I've noticed her standing under the tree a couple of times, looking out at the roadway." Kathy nodded his head and lit a cigarette. He went on his way, throwing a few words to the guy. "Good, then I'll see you tonight, or rather, tomorrow. Drop by my place in the evening to look at the collections." Michael looked at his neighbor and said nothing. He's weird. But on the other hand, he needs help now. And if the neighbor helps, it will be great. After all, even one life-saving achievement of medicine shift this day went quietly. No incidents, excesses, or patient antics. No nighttime police visits that might have suggested bad thoughts. Except that Kathy was restless this day. Michael watched her from the residence window, and at one point, noticed the girl becoming anxious. She began to wave her head intensely, and her ribbons in her hair fluttered in the wind. Then she turned abruptly and ran away from the fence. Directing his life toward Black Pond, the boy looked carefully at the roadway. Near the curb stood a dark blue, unremarkable car, old, but on the move. Strange. "Who is it?" Michael said it out loud. And then another orderly, Liam, turned around and looked out the window. "What kind of car is that? We've got to get to the bottom of this." And he ran out of the office, and in a few seconds his broad back the guy saw near the fence. The orderly waved his hands, shouted something in the direction of the driver, but apparently it had no effect. A few minutes later, though, when the chief physician started to approach the car suddenly sped off. "That's an interesting situation. What's all the fuss about? It's just a car. You can't even see through the tinted windows. Who's in there?" After a couple of minutes, Liam entered the office red as a boiled crawfish and started pacing the room back and forth. Michael at first said nothing, and then asked with the most indifferent tone possible, "And who was it in the car?" "Yes, you see, Michael, one psycho or psychos drive here under the fence and look at our patients. File a police report." The guy deliberately put such a provocative question, looking at the orderly and watching his reaction, but his face reflected nothing but anger and irritability. "What's the use of these cops? They only throw up their hands. They say it's none of our business. No corpus delicti and all that. and we have to run around chasing these assholes away. Yeah, there's plenty of crazy people out there. By the way, have you noticed how new this is? Kathy's patient react to that car. No, I didn't see her shaking, and she stood there shaking her head, and then she ran toward Black Pond. Oh, shit. Why didn't you say something? And the orderly rushed out into the street. I wonder why he reacted like that. Michael became curious, and he went to the window. The orderly was standing next to the head doctor, telling him something. Then he pointed toward the pond, and they both went there at a brisk pace. This is interesting, thought the trainee, and quickly ran to the first floor. He went to the artificial pond, which enjoyed a bad reputation already on the shore of the notorious Black Pond. The guy caught a picture on the shore, sat Kathy, and swayed, and near her stood an orderly and the chief physician, and nervously smoked. Guy did not understand what was going on, so he approached the trio and nodding at the girl, asked Noah, what happened? Yeah, you know, Michael. The first day Kathy almost went swimming in the lake, and when Liam said, she ran here, I thought she had a craving for water again. So she'd have wet her feet in waist-deep water. How can I put it, Michael? Our patients are such that they can drown themselves in a spoonful of water, and her reaction to the car, Liam told me about, also surprised me. She never showed any emotion before. Maybe the hypnosis has stopped working, and she is coming to her senses and grieving. You've probably been skipping classes on the subject of hypnosis, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't weaken over time. It's not sleeping pills or tranquilizers, is it? I guess, Noah, I guess. Both Michael and the doctor in charge stood by the lake for a few minutes, watching as the orderly took Kathy to the women's ward. I wonder what's going to happen to her and why she reacted the way she did to the car parked near the fence. Is there something to that? I'll have to tell my neighbor about it. Maybe he knows something, but the neighbor was the one in that car. Benjamin kicked his old broad out of the garage and thought it would be more convenient to watch the loony bin on wheels. It was at 1:30 that he drove the car up to the place where the loonies were strolling, and oh joy, near this fence stood Kathy. It was the daughter of the St. Petersburg authority figure. There was no doubt about it. Yes, he had seen her about 15 years ago. She had grown up and become a beautiful girl, but her eyes were still the same, just like when he'd seen her at her birthday party when she was 7. I wonder if the scar is still there. I should ask Michael to look at the scar on her leg. That's the only way to tell. I parked Benjamin's car with the window down and looked at the girl carefully. They must have drugged the poor girl with some pills. She's as good as dead. Eyes blank, all dressed up in some stupid costume. Yeah, I guess the guy's right about it all looking like something. The man rolled down the passenger side window more and called out to the girl, Kathy, listen to me. Don't be afraid. I'm Uncle Benjamin. Do you remember me? The girl stood there for a minute, paying no attention to the car and the driver. Then she turned her head and looked at him. At that moment, Benjamin waved his hand and smiled. But a meaningful thought suddenly flashed on the girl's face, and she began to shake her head, and then screamed and rushed running towards the park. Shit. Benjamin didn't expect such a reaction, and so quickly, closing the window, rushed out of the place in the direction of the city. I don't want to be seen here, otherwise they'll dump the office. Benjamin drove around the city for half an hour, and coming back, he could not resist and drove slowly along the fence of the psychiatric clinic. But there was no one in the yard. It must be lunchtime, the man said to himself, and decided to have a snack. He turned the steering wheel and headed for the nearest cafe to drink strong flavored coffee and eat a sweet mug. He had long favored this cafe with its own pastry shop. It served the strongest coffee and delicious pastries, just like when he was a kid. Yes, the man thought, when my grandson comes to visit me, I'll definitely bring him here with his father to drink coffee and eat more delicious food. But emotions came over Benjamin at the mention of his grandson, and a traitorous terror returned to his eye. "You're not well." The waitress came up to the man and handed him a menu. No, the girl just remembered his grandson, who lives abroad with his father, and thought that it would be nice to bring him here. "It's just a bit of a rush, so to speak. I understand. Coffee and a mug for you as always. Although, I'd advise you that our pastry chef has never tasted better. Let's have your labor. We should try it. Because, girlfriends. The man drank coffee and smiled at the rays of sunshine that penetrated the cafe, fell on his table and hands. It was so good to just sit there and think about nothing, and enjoy every minute. But he had to go home and think about how to plan his evening, or rather, his night out at the clinic. Benjamin paid for his coffee, and leaving the waitress a generous tip, drove home. Already at home he slept, touched up, under the shower, and after making himself a strong tea, sat down in the kitchen. Coffee is good, but strong and sweet tea helped him to think. Probably, habits from places not so distant were making themselves known, but he had long ago stopped paying attention to the fact that he was sitting down, and what people would think of it. And now he was helping a friend whose daughter had disappeared under very strange circumstances. A traitorous terror came to Benjamin's eye again. He remembered his daughter, beautiful and clever, who had gone to the Emirates and found her happiness there. How she was happy about her new job. And her husband, who, to his credit, loved her very much. Pregnancy and rejoiced. But, so Benjamin Nikita do not need to wipe the snot and pull Kathy. And the man began to pack a backpack, a flashlight, and an old lockpick set for a night out. Machine oil, so the lock wouldn't stick, if anything. Now, having lost one daughter, he wanted to help his friend Kathy's daughter get out of the asylum. The man had long thought about why she had been kidnapped a year ago from her father's home, and many people had written it all off as a thievery. But that's not the case here. Alex is a competent and clever man. He's handled the most heated disputes, so sworn enemies parted as friends and best partners. And here, who would take revenge? No, the man shook his head. It's something else, he thought to himself, not what others think. Why did he think that? He didn't know. But if the girl he'd seen today was Kathy and was his friend's daughter, Benjamin realized what the reason might be. The girl had an unearthly beauty, her figure, long blonde hair, blue eyes, and she had the same mind as her father. And if he was right, then she was probably kidnapped by visiting tourists who were in the business of kidnapping and shooting racy movies. Maybe that's what happened. But the man was simply afraid to think what Kathy might have done. After all, even among the right criminal authorities, violence is a forbidden topic. A woman must be loved. She must be persuaded. You have to placate her with gifts and kisses, but you can't rape her. All the more to shoot nasty things against her will. It's one thing for a woman to do it for money. It's another to rape her. Well, it's gonna be all right now. Be patient, Kathy. Throwing his backpack over his shoulders, Benjamin went out into the street and headed towards the psychiatric clinic. It was already dark, and there were no stars in the sky. What pleased the old thief? He quietly approached the fence and skulked away, but with a ducking motion. He stopped imperiously under a tree and looked around. There was no one. There was silence. It was ringing dark. Only, in the windows of the first-floor patients' rooms, there was a dim light burning. That's good. That means I won't need a flashlight. This light will suffice. And the man rushed to the cellar, quickly oiled the lock, and opened it professionally. Benjamin did not hang it in place, leaving the door covered, but not tightly, so that in case of need he could quickly run out. The hinges should be oiled as well. It wouldn't be good if the door suddenly peeked open quickly. Coping with the hinges, the man began to listen to the sounds in the basement and slowly walked forward. The hallway was quiet. On the left side were storerooms, some closed, others without doors. That's fine, the old thief thought. There will be a place to hide in case of trouble. Strange, where these subhumans had found a porn studio. But at the very end, Benjamin saw a massive door, so stuffed with felt. Yeah, there you are, and soundproofed at the very end so. No one could hear the girls screaming, the bastards. He went to the door and listened. But what kind of work had been done there? But what kind of barrier was there? There was no door that could not be opened by an old thief who had gone through a fine school. Indeed, the locks were also hidden under a layer of felt. Good point. No sound will get through the gaps. Well, that's clever, but I'll get you open. The man lifted the layer of felt carefully and listened. Quiet, which means no one. That's good, which means we can work. And Benjamin carefully began to pick the lock. Yes, it's a fancy lock, but for a craftsman like me, it shouldn't be too hard to pick. And after a couple minutes, the man opened the door to the secret studio. Wow, that's quite a spread. The furnishings, state-of-the-art, technology, and newfangled digital equipment, all put to great use. No wonder with the police running it all. And apparently, they're making a lot of money. Yeah, I guess crazy movies are popular with crazy people, but that man heard how heavy doors, covered with his lacquer, began to open, and without thinking, Benjamin jumped under the bed. That's quite a situation. At least the bed was wide, and it was covered with a long sheet all the way to the floor. Shit, thought the thief. What a fool not to listen to what was going on outside the door. So I got him. The main thing is not to suspect anything and not to search the place. But apparently the unexpected guests didn't suspect a thing. Oh, look, Noah's already opened the door. Didn't have to fiddle with the lock. Yeah, Stas. It's a nice studio. There's plenty of room for fun. And the man sat down on the bed and took pictures, and he laughed. Apparently, it was the cops Michael was talking about, who had been let in by the head doctor. So Benjamin quietly exhaled and listened further. Yes, boss. What are we going to do here? Are we going to film racy scenes? No, just participate. We got some local girls from the head doctor. So we'll try new things, boss will. It's not very exciting, but it's mental. I don't know what's on her mind. Would she bite or stab at the peak of pleasure? No. Yeah, well, it's a valid concern, Benjamin thought. But if you had a knife, you'd be so heavy. You'd be falling out of bed. You must be 150 pounds. And all that on a young girl. Ugh, that's disgusting. But what to do? So far, luck was not on his side. But then another man came into the room and said, "Sorry, Mr. Mikhailovich, I can't make it today. Apparently, it's either the moon or the stars. But our girls are on a rampage." Aha. Apparently, the head doctor tearfully apologizes for his wards. But apparently, the police brass didn't like the news. And he's not happy. Noah, why is that? Or does the hospital no longer have the appropriate injections? We've injected a couple of times, and the girl sleeps well. Yeah, we've already injected them, but it's still wrong. I'm sorry. Come back in a couple days and I'll put them on hard shots. Then they'll be as smooth as silk. All right. The cop said grudgingly and got out of bed, walked towards the exit. But next time, there should be 2 or even 3 girls. The doctor answered nothing, but only closed the door behind his guests, locking it shut. After a few minutes, the thief crawled out from under the bed and began to look around. He decided not to rush out of the room, but to put his video camera here. He definitely needed proof of what was going on here. Kathy then. He can quietly get out of the room, but this office needs to be covered up, and he knows to whom he will send the received materials. To his daughter Alex. I'm sure he'd tear anyone's throat out. Quietly, looking around, only stopped her gaze on the partners who were closing the improvised window. So over there at the very top you can install a camera. Yeah, It was a good thing he had his introductions, and not too long ago he'd been fitted with a mini camera that ran on batteries and turned on the recording at any movement. So, sweetie, put it up and film it here. And the other day I'll come and check what you've prepared for me and make sure the camera is in working order. Benjamin copied carefully his video, point, and check everything behind him, and quietly left the room. He locked the door and quietly walked out of the basement. There was no one near the entrance, but still God protects him, said the nun. The thief said quietly and began to walk along the walls to the cherished fence. Going out into the street, he took and walked along the road, pretending to stroll in the picturesque. Cat, taking in his hands a pre-prepared bottle of beer. And even if he was stopped by the police, they would not be able to attribute anything but an administrative offense to him. Although it's not like breaking into a mental institution, but I'll get over it. And with a quiet step, he went in the direction of his house. Got to the house. Benjamin quickly for about 10 minutes and already in his apartment, having thrown off his clothes and stood under the shower, he exhaled with relief. Yes, I have not seen such a case since the dashing 90s. But the good thing is now there will be evidence and grounds to visit you, gentlemen in white coats on legal grounds, and smash your balaganza with all the proletarian hatred. We've had a night's experience, and the smell of a psychiatric clinic. Old Kogan went to the kitchen and made himself some tea. He had to think calmly about what he had seen and how to present it to his Street Petersburg friend. The fact that they were making strawberries there, the man realized. And in principle, the camera will definitely record all the abominations. It's a matter of technique and time. But what about the girl who looked a lot like Kathy? You'll have to leave that to Michael. He works there, albeit as an orderly, but it would be easier for him to examine her under any pretext. Now, we just have to wait for the morning and for what Michael and I will bring. Benjamin turned off the light and left the cup on the table and went to bed. After all, the coming day also promised a lot of things to do and new information. It was necessary to have a fresh head to think everything over and make the right decision. Already, closer to 10 o'clock to the old thief at the door rang. Probably Michael, and he was not mistaken. Uncle Benjamin, I came straight from work to see you. May I come in? I've been waiting for you. I just got up and made breakfast. Give me my hands and sit down at the table. I don't feel like eating right now. Uncle Benjamin, do you have a lump in your throat? Our lunatics almost went crazy today. I don't know what happened, but they all went crazy. Some howled, others sang songs, and the women's ward all threw off their clothes. It was a restless night, I know. Michael looked at his neighbor perplexed, but did not ask anything. He sat down at the table and looked at the plate of scrambled eggs Benjamin had placed in front of him. I stopped by your lovely basement today and got into the spicy studio. And by the way, while I was there were visitors, most likely. Your Noah, the head doctor, and the police. But don't worry, nothing happened. First came the cops, then came your doctor and said that the patients are raging. So everything was quickly turned off. But it's not worth the wait. He promised them strawberries in a couple days. So, but no. But I left the video camera there for now. I'll pick it up in a couple days. We'll see what's on it. And then we'll figure out where to go and who to show it to. By the way, did you check to see if this new Kathy patient of yours has a cross-shaped scar? Yeah, the night before everyone else. I was working on her, and I got a good look at it. It's a small one just below the kneecap. Benjamin nodded and smiled. So it really is Kathy. She had been found. There was no doubt now. That was good. I'd have to get proof of the lechery, the doctors, and the police. Then we could celebrate victory. It's her, said Benjamin, eating scrambled eggs. There's no doubt now, but we have to wait a while. Let the camera capture everything, and then trust me, I know who to show the material to, and it won't go away. Uncle Benjamin, I realize. You're a lawman, but it's one thing to have a criminal altercation and another. This needs to go to court. That's right. Sweet man. What did you think? Gangbangers in black cars are gonna come in and shoot everybody, and that's it. No, we're just gonna show them all up. And then there's the lawyers, the courts, and of course, the media. Don't worry about that. Just keep your ear to the ground at your job and try to make sure that nothing happens to Kathy during these days. By the way, who's giving her the sedation shots? Yeah, there's this Liam. Orderly, big guy with huge fists. Why? Try to make sure you get the job. You make sure you don't give the girl the shots. She has to come off the drugs and be, so to speak, sober and clear-headed when it all comes to a head. But even if things don't work out, just keep an eye on her. Michael nodded his head and smiled, acknowledging the breakfast. He himself hadn't noticed how hungry he'd gotten in 24 hours and practically gobbled up everything he'd prepared in one fell swoop. Yes, he had a good appetite. The landlord looked at the young orderly and smiled. The man brewed tea and took out his favorite girlfriends. Let's drink tea. And listen to me carefully for now. Michael nodded his head, began to listen to the old thief. He told him that Kathy, supposedly the daughter of one of the street Petersburg authorities, it was time to close this studio, and his help would be very helpful. And she wasn't mentally ill, more like a kidnapping victim. Half an hour later, the guy was on his way home. Uncle Benjamin's gonna go, or my mother and grandmother will be worried. And you call me if you need anything. And where will you find out? Okay, while we wait. If there's anything new, I'll drop by Grandma's. Thanks for the goodies. She's always spoiling the old man. What are you, an old man? You'll give the young ones a head start, won't you? And shaking hands, the neighbors parted. Michael opened the door and from the doorstep heard the smell of his grandmother's famous PR. She at his place always cooked her signature delicious and grandmother's pie. Smells like from the doorstep. Why'd you stay late at work? Oh no, I stopped by my neighbor Benjamin's. But they're to talk and I was going to talk to the old fella about something. Mom, don't coach. No one's safe from jail or prison. We all could be, just like in my Elms house, by the way. And the guy threw his backpack on the hall table and went to the bathroom to wash his hands. When he came out, he went into the kitchen, where breakfast was already on the table. Mom, I don't want any. I ate at work, but tea and cake would be great. Michael didn't tell her that he'd had breakfast at the old thugs. He didn't want to make his mother nervous. The woman looked at him carefully, but didn't say anything. Only the grandmother, apparently, guessed where her grandson had eaten, but shook her head, said nothing. Grandson, but I just put the pie on. We'll be ready only in half an hour. In the meantime, bear with me. All right, I'll help Siberia in the meantime. One boy nodded his head and gave his grandmother a peck on the cheek and went back to his room. Michael spent these days at home, waiting for information from Benjamin, but he was silent. They crossed paths in the yard a couple of times, but the neighbor only said hello and didn't say anything. And the guy didn't really insist. He understood that if he didn't say anything, it was the right thing to do. But on Sunday, Benjamin decided to check the familiar basement and take the camera. He didn't tell his neighbor about his plans. He decided to take the tape first, see what he had, and then act according to the situation. Late at night, Benjamin, as he did the first time, went to the cellar door and looked around. Everything was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Come on, he had to go get the camera anyway, and he slipped downstairs, opened the greased door, and froze on the threshold. The man listened carefully to the sounds, but the silence was sepulchral. With quiet shuffling steps, Benjamin approached the very last door, orbited it, and varnished it and lifted it. At the keyhole, he listened carefully. Quiet. So the studio is not working for its intended purpose today. That's fine, no one will interfere. Quickly removing the camera, Benjamin headed for the exit, and just as quickly went out and closed the door as he came in. But as he passed the women's quarters, the man didn't hold back. He walked over to one of the dimly lit windows and peered through it at a bed and a dark-haired woman sitting on it. A woman dressed in a short dress with ribbons in her hair. Yes, thought the man. Another victim. How did I get the camera in time? He mentally pitied her because he knew what would happen next. But on the other hand, what could he do now? Nothing. Once outside, Benjamin walked home as before, pondering what he would see on the tape at home. He inserted the flash drive into the TV. The man began to watch the video, and what he saw there only confirmed his suspicions. And the worst and most disgusting, he angrily turned off the TV after a few minutes of watching, threw the remote on the couch, and went out onto the balcony. Yeah, that was to be expected. Okay, now we can show Alex all of this, and then let him think how to deal with these creatures and tell Kathy about it. Benjamin smoked a long time to calm down, and understandably so. Seeing all that filth, although he is a thief and experienced, has seen a lot in his life, but such a man has always respected women. But how do they even do it? They're sick women. It's unthinkable, and he couldn't find an answer. What's there to say? Mental illness must have its own degree of variance, or maybe it's congenital. Who knows? Benjamin threw the cigarette butt down and went to bed. What was it, though? Even after a couple of minutes of watching, he was shivering. But apparently, fatigue and emotion took over, and the man fell into a deep but restless sleep. Already, in the morning, Benjamin was on duty on the balcony to look for Michael, who had to return from work. And when he appeared at the entrance, he called him and gestured for him to come up to him. Uncle Benjamin, anything new? Yes, not on our honor. Remember I told you I put a camera in the basement? Benjamin nodded and beckoned him into the hall, turned on the video, and let him watch. It was filmed by Michael. The orderly was horrified to see the head doctor and his cronies having fun with sick women at night. He certainly did not expect such a thing. The boy closed his eyes and quietly said, "Turn it all off." Benjamin did not argue. It was really disgusting. He sat there and didn't know how to go on living with it. Opening his eyes, he looked at the landlord and asked if he had anything to drink. He nodded his head and took out a bottle of vodka from the bar. He hadn't been drinking for a long time, but he always had alcohol just in case, and now he put a glass of white vodka on his neighbor's face. He held it out and said, "Wait, I'll bring snacks." But Michael did not wait for an appetizer, but drank the vodka in one fell swoop and sniffed it with his sleeve. At that minute, the host entered the room with a slice of sausage and cheese, but the guy nodded his head negatively and said, "I can have some more vodka, but at least you're behind the ring." Benjamin poured, sat down next to him. Michael drank this glass in one breath, and now he took a snack and looked at the old thief attentively, talking about what we'll do, what we won't do, and what you'll do. I already thought to show to whom it is necessary to give a report to their own, and I will wait what they will tell me. But I think it won't take long to get a reaction. I also asked you here on purpose. I want to warn you that there may be some serious inspections at your clinic in the near future. I'm aware of that. I hope everything's legal and these assholes don't get away with it. Don't worry, they won't. You tell me, how's Kathy? How can I tell you? I got the head doctor to let me give her shots, just for show. But I didn't. But then, you see, Uncle Benjamin, she came into the clinic sort of hypnotized. So, she probably doesn't realize where she is. Or maybe it's like she's in there. And is she really mentally damaged? I hope not. Although we can't rule out that possibility. But now, The main thing is to get her out of there, and then other specialists will deal with her." And Michael nodded his head. He was sober as a glass even after 2 glasses of alcohol. Apparently, the nervous shock did not let the alcohol to work. The guy sat on his neighbor's couch for a while longer, silently leaned back, then looked at the man and said, "I'm going home. I need to be good. Just Michael, I'm begging you, don't do anything on your own right now. Do you realize how dangerous this is? That's one thing. And secondly, you can't do anything on your own. You'll only make things worse for yourself and Kathy and the other patients." The boy nodded his head. He realized he was right, and it was stupid and dangerous to take any action now. All he could do was wait. But he didn't wait long. The very next day, he was summoned to work. "Michael, good morning. Is no bothering you? You've been summoned to work immediately." The head doctor's voice was frightened and trembling. "Good morning. What's wrong?" the guy asked. It was just for show. Did he realize what might be going on in his clinic? Nothing yet. Come on over." And the head doctor hung up. "Yeah, that's how you guys got moving." Apparently, the neighbor got the materials to the right place, and now the guy quickly got dressed and started to leave the apartment when he was stopped on the doorstep by his grandmother. "Michael, what are you doing up so early?" the chief of medicine called. "I have to go to work for my shift." "So you didn't even bring any food?" "No, I didn't have a shift. There's something going on, and it's probably an emergency." "Okay." Then he slammed the door, and 5 minutes later he was at work, and what he saw made the guy very happy. A whole brigade of enforcers were crowding around the main entrance. Orderlies and doctors nervously stood and smoked in the distance, and patients were carefully taken out and put into ambulances. Michael approached the orderly Liam and asked Liam, "What is going on? Don't you see OMON? We're raiding and cleaning up, and that someone is selling drugs. Go higher. Someone organized a porn studio in our basement, and they blamed it on our head doctor and a few of his henchmen. That's what it's all about." Michael made a surprised face, but at that very moment he saw Kathy being taken out of the women's building by 2 men and carefully put into a black Jeep. So she really was the daughter of a reputable thief. But thank God she wasn't mentally ill. He looked at her and was startled by the hand on his shoulder. "It was you, Michael." The voice was commanding and quiet at the same time. He turned around and saw a man dressed in an expensive suit. He immediately realized that he was either one of the highest representatives of the government or a criminal authority. Michael nodded his head and only wanted to ask, "Who are you?" But the man was ahead of him. "I'm Alexander, Kathy's father. Benjamin, your neighbor, told me everything about you, about your help. So thank you for bringing my daughter back. You're welcome. I know it doesn't have to be this way. It's mean and wrong. Kathy's gonna be okay." The man nodded his head and looked at the boy carefully. But he didn't say anything. And what could he say if he didn't know anything about his child's condition? But God willing, everything would be fine. He just nodded his head once more, thanked him quietly, and turned around and walked to his car, which immediately sped away. As soon as he closed the door, Michael stared after him for a few minutes, reflecting on the situation, and at that moment the chief doctor and his associates were being loaded into the truck. It was all over. Michael did not notice how his neighbor Benjamin quietly approached him and clapped him on the shoulder. Now all the members of the Corps de Ballet have been captured and sent to places not so remote. Believe me, my contacts will make sure of that. And Kathy, it was her dad, but in a black BMW. Yeah, I think she'll be fine. And you, neighbor, thanks for pulling her and the other women out of that bondage." Michael raised an eyebrow, perplexed, not really understanding what the neighbor was saying, but he immediately clarified. "You see, Kathy isn't the only healthy woman in this almshouse. Many beauties were just grabbed on the street and brought here under the guise of one or another mental disorder. And what was done to them next? You know what I mean. Now the shop's been shut down. And a special big thank you from my friends. The neighbor patted him on the shoulder and went home. And Michael stood on the street and smoked for a long time, realizing that there could be a great number of such clinics all over the country. After all, there will always be people like his chief physician, the chief of police, prone to such entertainments. But now, Michael realized that there was one less clinic of debauchery, and it was his direct merit. He walked home and thought about how a person's fate can turn out. Even take Noah, the head doctor, a respected man, and an excellent specialist. But something drove him to such a crime. Kathy is the daughter of a wealthy father, albeit with a criminal record, intelligent, and beautiful. She had suffered at the hands of non-humans who could simply stab her with drugs to the point of being a vegetable. But that's all in the past now, and his town can breathe easy. Oh, Michael, you got home from work so fast, lady. How's Grandma's pie cooking? The grandmother looked at her grandson and realized everything on his face. She smiled and put her specialty pie on the table, pouring her grandson some tea-flavored tea. The woman knew that now everything would be fine in this town, and certainly no one else would get hurt. And all of this was due to her grandson. She was proud of him, as any grandmother would be. After all, it is probably right to say that one loves one's grandchildren more than one loves one's own children. Betty smiled, and after patting him on the head, sat down on a chair and carefully watched her specialty pie with doctors like him flying in both cheeks. One could be calm for every patient, for everyone.
Subscribe and click the bell.
In the morning, Susan felt better physically, but her mental state was terrible, and as if to make it worse, an investigator came to her room. "I need to interview you." "It won't take long. Don't worry. I'm told you're feeling better. There's nothing further threatening your health." Easy for him to say. How can a man understand the condition of a woman who's lost a child? And the investigator continued, "The doctors told us that there is a poison in your body, quite rare. Accidentally, it could not get into your body, and in connection with this, I must ask a few questions. 1, do you have any enemies? It all started as a long-awaited happiness with a rare celebration, a reunion of high school friends, 20 years after graduation. As it happened, Susan had never seen many of her classmates after graduation. Their school was in the old neighborhood, and just by the 10th grade, the families of many of the boys and girls got new apartments and moved away. Graduating class, some of them had already traveled from the new neighborhoods almost across town. And after graduation, Susan's family left, and a new life began, and institute new friends. First years, Susan longed for her native places, came to visit those who stayed to live in the old house, and in the school somehow came, but then it was not to that, and other attachments appeared. And now, as an adult, an established woman, she was going to meet, in fact, with her childhood and youth, and as she secretly admitted to herself, with her first love. Although there was no love, that is, romance such as in old movies show, she and Sebastian, the first handsome man of the class, and not only. They did not walk hand in hand, did not kiss furtively in the public garden, under a lilac bush. Alas, all this was only in Susan's dreams. In reality, there were only her bitter tears in her pillow, because her beloved did not pay any attention to her. That is, he did, when it was necessary to make her laugh, to embarrass her in front of his friends. By graduation, she couldn't tell if she loved Sebastian or hated him. And after graduation, they never saw each other again, which Susan was happy about, although there was still a void in the place of that failed first high school love, Would he come or not? Susan thought, getting ready for the meeting. And what had he become? Was he married? I thought he was going to law school. No, I'm not going to talk to Sebastian about my long-lost love, and I don't hope that we'll be able to make something work now. Oh, I'm just curious. And not just about him, but about a lot of other people. There's Kevin. He seemed to have a crush on me. Kept looking at me in class. Or is it the obnoxious John? I hope he doesn't show up at all. Although I hear he married our first honors student. How interesting it would be to find out about everyone, who became who, how they changed, what they look like. Susan herself could not boast of success in her personal life, no husband, no children. In this, of course, is not the slightest fault of that Sebastian. She had much stronger crushes. There were also relationships, but it did not lead to anything. And not because of the fact that Susan something was wrong, not the beauty of her fate did not deprive her, not mind, and the character was golden, but first she wanted to finish the institute and studied very seriously. Her father by that time has already very seriously engaged in business and believed that the only daughter will be his best assistant. And while I wait for you to marry a good man, and even take, you will find a poor man. Don't sulk. I'm just kidding, but every joke has its own joke. Don't trust anyone, and in general, go ahead and learn it yourself. Susan studied well, without any encouragement, and her father's words motivated her even more. Her father relies on her, considers her capable of continuing his life's work, and his daughter did not want to disappoint him. So the search, at least a poor man, at least a reliable assistant, were postponed for later, after graduation. But barely had time to graduate from the institute, as my mother fell ill. That is, she may be ill much earlier, but she never admitted it, much less complained. Quiet, modest woman, she used to live in the shadow of her bright, loud-voiced husband, strictly takes care of the house and relatives. Any indisposition, even a slight runny nose of her husband or daughter, led her to despair, forced her to develop vigorous activity to save the sick. And her fatal disease Procaroli Valley hid and from relatives and from themselves, and only when, apparently, it became unbearable, went to the doctor, but it did not hide, even when she was diagnosed, urgently hospitalized. She did not talk about why she would have to leave home for the first time, perhaps, for the first time. It was nothing. Just a checkup, a week or two at the beach, and that's it. She comforted her daughter. You just take care of your daddy. I showed you where the chamomile tea is for him. Make it. He's got a stomach and eat right. Don't go to my place. I'm well fed there. I don't need anything. Of course, Susan called the information desk the same day to find out her mother's condition and was struck dead by the response of the woman on duty. Oncology ward, go ahead. The next day, they went to the hospital with her father, both to see her mom and to talk to the doctor. His words were even more horrifying. How could the disease be so neglected? If only she had gone to the hospital a year earlier. It's already stage 4. Of course we'll start treatment, and don't be so frightened. Hope for the best, but she never complained about anything. Father was breaking his fingers. I beg you, I'll sell everything for any money, just so long as she's alive. She doesn't complain now, on the contrary, she's eager to go home and we'll probably discharge her soon. You'll continue your treatment at home. Money can't solve everything. Moreover, I will tell you that it will not always help. Don't throw away that money and don't torture the patient. It's her optimism that gives me hope, and it may be the best medicine. Susan and her dad walked out of his office, wobbling with grief. Couldn't Mom be helped? They tried to cheer up in front of the room, but Mommy, as always, understood everything from their faces. "Well, I told you not to come. You're just scared for nothing." "How could you not be scared?" "I can see they're both turning green. Look at all the really sick people lying here. And what about me?" "Yes, I'll be discharged one day and everything will be the same. And in this hospital, I agree, the air alone would make any healthy person sick." And discharged her discharge. But what is there still? A terrible disease, every day changed Mom, took away from her strength, did not allow to hide her condition. At home she was treated, faithfully took medication, even said that she was getting better. But what better? A year later she collapsed. Susan had to quit her job, learn to be a nurse, a caregiver. Well, it's all for the best. If something happens, and you know how to give first aid and give a shot, my mom used to joke, although God forbid that these skills are needed. Be well, both of you, may you be well. Don't cry, my daughter. I'm not saying I'm dying. These pills are making me feel better. I'm sleeping very well, and I'm completely healthy in my sleep. But not in her sleep. Mom melted away and died 2 years later. Her father's grief prevented Susan from mourning her mother. She began to fear for his condition. Always cheerful, active, not discouraged, he seemed to be deprived of the necessary nourishment. His wife's illness and on him and affected him not in the best way, and her death in general turned not old yet a man into a weeping weak old man, with shaking hands. "How is it, my daughter? How come we didn't keep our mommy safe?" "Every now and then," he said. "How can we live now, my dear?" Susan was afraid that her father would seek solace in alcohol. But no, he didn't need it. He always looked like a drunk. Her daughter tried to bring him back to work, realizing that it was the only way to save her, but her father was no longer interested in anything. He went to work, frightening the employees with changes in his appearance and behavior, and Susan was already doing all the work. No matter what question or advice she asked her father, the answer was the same. "What difference does it make, Susan? Do what you want. You can't get your mom back. Then what's the point of all this?" In the end, Susan called a doctor. A person can't just melt from longing like sugar in boiling water. It turned out that in addition to depression, the father has a serious heart problem. A year later, after the death of his beloved wife, and father died, exhausted, as everyone who was aware of what was happening said. Susan became the sole owner and manager of the entire business. True, there were some kind-hearted people who wanted to become co-owners of the partners. What's a girl to do with a load like that on her own? "You'll ruin your father's business," they told her. But Susan wasn't such a girl. She was already 26, and for the last few years, she'd been carrying everything on her own, and she'd managed very successfully. On the other hand, they started coming around. "You need to get married. A year or 2 more and you'll be an old maid. Marry a reliable man, have a baby. That's your woman's business, and a husband can handle the business." They began to bring her grooms, and this Susan, completely disgusted from the thought of the need to arrange their own fate. Maybe among those young and adult men were worthy, maybe even dreaming of a relationship and marriage, but also about the company 2 in each. She saw some mercantile interest and recoiled with fear. She could not give her father's business in the wrong hands. And she herself did not want to become an annex to the firm. That's how she lived 10 years alone, not really burdened by loneliness. Well, yes, sometimes very much wanted to become, finally, the mother of the family, to take care not only of the business, but also of relatives, but with each passing year, the possibility of realizing this dream all weakened. Dreams remained. In them, she had both her children and her husband. and this husband more and more often acquired the features of Sebastian, unfulfilled love. That's why Susan was going to meet her former classmates, with excitement and anticipation of some changes. And in general, she wanted to unwind. Not so often happened in her life holidays. Yes, at work sometimes organized corporate parties, sometimes she was invited to visit a few relatives. Her mother's cousin, her father's brother's family, that's all the fun. But what fun is there? At the corporate party, she is still the boss. You cannot relax completely. And relatives, you come like a holiday and everything is as it should be. The table is set, salads, baked chicken, homemade pickles, Napoleon cake, and talk. And I'm still waiting. Susan, when you and your fiancé come, or even your husband, I want to see your kids. Why are you shaking your head? It's time. You're over 30. What are you waiting for? You've got your beauty and your mind. Who else is going to be married and bring up children? After such a holiday, you go home with an unpleasant feeling, although you realize that the aunt wished you well and spoke sincerely. But who needs the sincerity? And here, after all, there was a meeting with those whom she had known many years ago as children, and now she was to see them as adults, but also to show herself and boast of her successes. Because Susan believed that not only family is the most important thing in a person's life. Yes, she is not married, but not because her 5 husbands left her, and she alone now brings up 5 children, and not because no one needs her. She may have other interests and other achievements, and not a small one, because in her business life she succeeded, and she looked very good. I remembered how my aunt sometimes sighed at the TV. I wonder how people age differently. That artist. We're the same age, for God's sake. Yes, she's 2 months younger than me, but you'd think she's 20 years younger. They're like dragonflies, and sometimes I can barely crawl. Well, you compared our life and theirs. Her husband consoled her. What about my life? I did not carry stones, and she not only vacationed at resorts. They have artists. Life is not sugar, too. Touring, rehearsals, all sorts of travel, and that not to mention the nerves. It's just that you can marry her, but I'm in a home for invalids. Tell me too, and who are you going to marry, bride? Uncle was joking. Jokes are jokes, but we must think about what Susan should wear tonight. Maybe, of course, in a simple, youthful way, in jeans and a sweater. They're high school friends, but they're not high school friends anymore. And his business suit is also not an option, not a business meeting, besides want to relax. For the same reason 2 fancy outfits are not suitable, not a fashion show after all, and she is not a model. It is necessary to dress smart, beautiful, but not flashy. She's not going to arouse envy either, and in whom? Her classmates? They had a good class, no marginalized people. No one became a media personality either. There are no artists, writers, or any other celebrities, so she has to look accordingly. Although Susan, it must be admitted, has achieved more than many. Yes, she has something to be proud of, but she is not going to show her superiority. She chose a beautiful dress, but not provocative. She also did her hair herself, quite restrained, with jewelry is not overdone, and was ready for the exit. The gathering of those wishing to take part was appointed at school in the assembly hall, and on the way to the school, a petite beauty rushed up to her. Susan, you? Oh, you look gorgeous. You're so beautiful, and what a car. My husband dropped me off and left. What an asshole, chirped Doll Beauty, in which Susan easily recognized a former classmate. Cindy, I'm so glad to see you're still so dainty. No, I've grown 2 mosquito heads. Susan laughed happily. She was really happy to see the smallest girl of their class and to hear her doll-like voice. "Who's coming over there?" "Oh, is that James Clark? He put a frog in my briefcase in 6th grade, so I'm gonna get back at him." "I think that's Molly and Robert. They got married. We have 4 couples. Can you believe it?" "Come on, let's go." Finally, everyone was gathered, seated in the auditorium, and the former students were greeted by the teachers who had grown old and sweet. It is even strange that 20 years ago someone was afraid of them, someone frankly disliked them. Also, classmates, what kind of good grown-up people have all become? It's hard to imagine that once these same people were nasty, mischievous, and fought. Susan looked around furtively, but Sebastian was gone. One of the girls suddenly pulled out a thick notebook that looked familiar to many. "Look what I have here." This is the questionnaire that everyone here filled out in 10th grade. Let's remember what we were like 20 years ago, what we dreamed of, and who had what come true. Everyone leaned over the notebook with interest, hardly recognizing their youthful revelations. They regretted that most of the questions were not so interesting and important now. Well, who cares what movie I liked back then? Here, let's talk about who wanted to accomplish what. Here's Cindy. "I want to be loved and be loved." Did it come true? It came true. "I divorced my first husband, but through no fault of my own. It was a mistake, but I'm happy now. My second husband and I have true love and a beautiful daughter." Kelly, you wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. Did it work out? Unfortunately, no. At the insistence of my parents, I graduated from a technical college, but I don't work by profession. Only my own kindergarten. I had my 3rd boy a year ago. Well, we'll make that count. Clara, a junior high school teacher, and how? Teacher, but high school. I'm trying to teach math to the same people we were recently. Even with the overachievement, well done. That's James, but there's a bit of a joke in there too. I want to be bold. I want to be brave. I want to rip your clothes off. Whose notebook is this? Yours, Lucy. You and James got married, and this one's a total hit. Now you're Susan. You're going to go to school and carry on your father's work? Yeah, I had to. Although if I'd written a couple years earlier, it wouldn't have been the same. But look at everyone else's writing. But Sebastian, I'll be a judge, and then you'll be on your own. Joker, where is he, by the way? He's not here, but he said he'd be here. I called him. I heard from one of Sebastian's old friends. There he is. There he is. Cindy shouted triumphantly. Remember what the punishment for tardies used to be? Scrubbing the floors after class. But we don't have class today. Laughing, Sebastian, who showed up later than everyone else, shook hands, hugging, recognizing his grown-up friends. Susan stood up to meet him too, and for Sebastian it was as if everyone around him had disappeared. He was looking at her with that look she had longed for in the past, but now what? Now it's a grown, respectable man, probably married. That's why he was late. Probably asking for his wife, I guess. Hello, Sebastian, she said to break the stupor. Or what should I call you now? Your Honor. No, my dream didn't come true, although I became a lawyer. True, now without a job, just left the firm where I worked for 10 years. I just realized that there will be no development there. So I don't know what title I'll be honored with yet. And you and Susan, your ladyship now, you must be glowing. I won't be offended if you call me that. Susan laughed. She wanted to remind him how he had called her names in childhood, but she bit her tongue. There was no need to spoil such a wonderful evening. Meanwhile, the festive part was over. Everyone moved to the banquet hall, where the conversation became more lively. Then the dancing began. Sebastian, of course, invited Susan, and more than once. She, remembering that she was driving, refused alcohol, but she still felt drunk with happiness, back to the days of her long-gone youth. Her dream had come true. It was Sebastian who held her in his arms, her gently spinning head resting on his shoulder. After such a wonderful encounter, would they have to part again? He whispered compliments, spoke of his admiration, but nothing more. Susan already knew that Sebastian was not married, but apparently he didn't need her either. At the end of the evening, she decided to take matters into her own hands. "Sebastian, take my card. Call me if there's anything wrong with the job. My old lawyer at my firm just quit 6 months ago. I hired a young one, 3 years out of college, you know. So I'm looking for someone more experienced. You're always welcome." And shortly after that evening, a new lawyer arrived at Susan's firm. To the great displeasure of the previous one, Alvin Togo was not fired, but was made Sebastian's assistant. The young man, also very smart, did not quit, but no one knew the true reasons. He stayed with the firm, having received, whatever you say, a demotion, not because he was afraid of being out of work. Good lawyers everywhere are worth their weight in gold. The reason was much deeper and more serious. Alvin was secretly in love with Susan. But it never occurred to her, but what kind of love would that be? The guy was 12 years younger than her, and small signs of attention, like the appearance of fresh flowers on her desk, a cup of her favorite coffee for lunch, she attributed it to the subtle courtesy shown by colleagues, and maybe Alvin himself, but only out of respect. Sebastian, however, began to court her quite openly, which delighted Susan. He did not seem to be burdened with loneliness, that is, she managed to convince herself of it. In fact, what are the difficulties of a single, but quite well-to-do, in addition, a city woman? There is no mowing in the city, as it was written in some book, and physical help was not needed. But lonely evenings, what is it like? Especially for a young, beautiful woman striving for an active and interesting life. Especially after 30, it became difficult. At first, Susan, demonstrating independence, boldly went alone to the theater, concerts, exhibitions. It seems that such events do not go to socialize with gentlemen, but alone turned out to be painful. One to come, at intermissions to sit in the hall, crumpling in his hand program, one to leave, and no one will not help to take off your coat, no one then will not get it in the check room, will not serve. Everyone goes in pairs and is so alert, attentive to their companions, but she is alone, no one to talk to on the way home, to discuss what we've seen and heard. No, it is better to sit at home, though alone, but no one knows it. And if we don't respond to the phone calls, then maybe they'll think that Susan's gone on a bender. So what? A woman is lonely, take a walk, take a walk. For the same purpose, she sometimes bought herself flowers, and on ordinary weekdays returned with bouquets. Let them think she wasn't lonely. What she didn't want most of all was to be pitied. And now she had the opportunity, if not to walk, then to walk, just to come out of her shell. Rarely a day Sebastian didn't invite her to a restaurant, theater, or some other cultural event. And if they did without it, they just walked the streets and talked. So much news has accumulated over the past 20 years. That is not news anymore. But that's for whom, how? They had to get reacquainted. They didn't talk about their school past. Unfortunately, there was nothing to talk about. Susan confessed that she was in love with him and resented his relationship. "Yes, I was a fool, but honey, don't you realize I was head over heels in love? I didn't know how to express it. A lot of guys do that, teasing, pulling pigtails. First grade, yeah, but 10th grade? But enough about that. It's funny to take offense at things that happened long ago. I mean, really, now that we're together, I can make it up to you, right? I guess so. And I guess I'm finally happy. Susan felt happy for the first time, and so did Sebastian, who was not only winning Susan's heart, he was almost the boss of the company. Not even a year later, the owner had written a general power of attorney for him, which meant that he had full control over all matters and finances. To the chief accountant's somewhat perplexed question, Susan replied, "What's the big deal? Sebastian is already fully aware of everything, and he and I are getting married. Yes, the application has been filed, and we're getting married in a month." The news traveled around the firm. Someone rejoiced for the lonely to this boss, although some, of course, admired the dexterity of the young man. And there was one person who was truly saddened by this news. Alvin. He still held the position of paralegal and was sitting idle more and more often, Sebastian less and less often privy to his affairs. It frustrated and annoyed the young man, but for the time being, he was dying to be near the woman he loved. Perhaps he hoped for reciprocity, that someday he would be able to confess his feelings to Susan. But realizing that Sebastian had beaten him to it, he wrote a statement and went to his boss to sign it. Upon reading the application, Susan raised her eyebrows. "What's the matter?" "Everyone seems to be happy with your work. And that's why I don't have a job, in fact. And anyway, I can't work forever as a junior assistant to the head janitor. Can I? I've got to develop myself. Well, I can't keep you." Susan was indeed a little sad that this young man would be leaving the firm, but not for personal reasons. For her, there were no men other than Sebastian. Alvin was simply a competent and promising lawyer, not at all superfluous in his position. But she signed the application and said goodbye to the young man warmly, writing him a solid bonus for good work. A month later, there was a gorgeous wedding of Sebastian and Susan. Happy newlyweds received congratulations from colleagues and relatives, rejoiced at the changes in their lives, and sincerely believed that their happiness will not end. A few days after the wedding, they went on a wedding trip to a fashionable resort. How wonderful to be happy! Susan exulted quietly. And just to have a vacation from everything in the world except love. "I haven't had a normal vacation in all these years, it seems, so I took a week sometimes to sleep. And then suddenly I have the sea, the sun, and you. You are my sea and sun." Sebastian replied, "I swear from now on you'll be on vacation like this, several times a year." "Alone?" Susan pouted. "And who will stay in the shop?" Sebastian laughed back. "It's such an inconvenience to work together, and with such responsibility. We're sunbathing here, and they're already dismantling everything. I've got a 100 times tested team. You don't have to worry about that, but a few vacations a year, I agree." "It's not gonna happen, and together. Well, we'll see. I mean, our happiness is just beginning, right?" It really was. After returning from vacation, the couple started working with renewed vigor. Susan had one more wish, though, and that was children. And she was aware of the fact that there was not much time left for its realization. The years were flying by so quickly. She herself did not really believe that she would be able to become a mother, and therefore she did not share her dreams even with her husband. And at the end of the first year of marriage, when she first felt some unusual ailment, did not immediately suspect what was obvious, and certainly did not share her suspicions with anyone but a doctor, a gynecologist from a private clinic whose services she had been using for many years, and there the best suspicions were justified. After a comprehensive examination, the doctor congratulated her on the fact that in 7 months the baby would be born and was surprised by the woman's reaction. She ducked her face into the palms of her hands and cried, What is it? Are you not happy? Surprised the doctor. I am happy. I just can't believe my happiness. I'm 40 years old. Isn't it too late? Am I giving my baby everything he needs? Well, as long as it's in me. Will my body be able to handle it? What are you worried about? If you'd had a baby every year or a dozen abortions, but you haven't, your body's been preparing for this event, and as far as I know, it's gonna be fine. Probably more than once. So you can go home and make your husband happy. I hope it's good news for him, too. I bet he will, because we're the same age, and he and I have never had children before. On the way home, however, Susan decided to hold off a bit on the happy news. She and Sebastian would have their first wedding anniversary in a week's time, a very appropriate occasion to announce it during the celebration, for now they would have to rejoice alone. However, that joy was suddenly overshadowed by a call from an old friend. Susan, I'm sorry if I'm upsetting you, but I think you should know this. I was walking downtown today, and I was shopping. And as I was walking past the restaurant, you know, the one next to the shoe store, it has these big windows. So, through the window I saw your Sebastian at one of the tables, and he was not alone, but with a very interesting blonde. Thank you. How much do I owe you for this information? Susan said dryly, I knew I'd be left to my own devices. It's my fault. My friend was upset. I believe my husband. It must have been a business meeting. He has to meet with his partners a lot. I do not know if with business partners are accepted so cooing, then of course, what can I understand in it? A friend interrupted the call and immediately sent some photos. On them was Sebastian. He was really sitting at a table in a restaurant, tenderly holding the hand of a beautiful girl. They smiled at each other. It didn't look much like a business meeting. Susan felt the blood drain from her face. To poison a happy day like this. Though yes, what did a girlfriend have to do with it? But Sebastian can't be cheating on me either. Surely there was a simple explanation. In the evening, she without further ado laid out her phone in front of her husband, with those very photos, and looked questioningly at her lover. And with growing horror saw that Sebastian became nervous. He was clearly confused, did not know what to say, then asked sadly, Are you spying on me? I didn't think you would stoop to such a thing. It would not have occurred to me. It was an acquaintance decided to open my eyes on your pastime. Congratulations. You have very observant friends. I envy their husbands. Except they didn't do you a favor. They ruined your anniversary surprise. In the restaurant My Soul, I was dining with a client and his lawyer, this very girl. The client left, and I stayed with her. The girl, as you can see, is young, doesn't understand much, so I tried. No, not to deceive her, but to turn the case in our favor, you know? And it's gonna be a very lucrative contract. If I manage to pull it off as planned, we will be able to rise very significantly. For several years we will be secured, you know? In a week's time, it'll all be up and running, as they say. I'll refrain from details, let a little bit of intrigue remain. As it is, I'll have to think of another present. Sebastian had a look of displeasure, a jokingly pouty look, and Susan, of course, melted. Oh, I'm so sorry. I swear I didn't doubt you for a minute, but you know I had my doubts. By the way, I have a surprise for you, too. A very nice one, I promise. So they made up. Before they could quarrel, trust was restored. Each in his own way prepared for the celebration of the first anniversary of marriage, not realizing that there was a man living nearby who trusted Sebastian, every day less and less. It was Alvin. Yes, he had not forgotten Susan, the woman to whom he had never dared to hint his feelings, and the feelings remained, both for Susan and Sebastian. They were the exact opposite, though. Yes, Alvin disliked his colleague at first sight, which was not surprising, because Sebastian had displaced him in the place that Alvin considered his by right. Perhaps the more senior lawyer had more reason to claim the place, at least experience, but that was well understood from the outside. The appearance of Sebastian, whose relationship with Susan was no secret to anyone, was a serious defeat for Alvin, and an even more serious reason not to like or trust the man. Working together, he noticed some oddities, but there was nothing he could do about it. No one listened to him. After he found out that Susan was marrying Sebastian, Alvin realized that nothing further depended on him. Now he could do whatever he wanted. Suspect his enemy of the worst sins. It won't change anything. Susan loves him, and Alvin. Well, Alvin? At his existence, she simply forgot before the door closed behind him. You shouldn't have dragged it out so long. You could have confessed sooner and let it be. Let's say she'd have laughed in his face, thrown him out of sight. So what? That's how it ended anyway. But then I'd know I'd done everything I could. And she would know that I'm not just an inexperienced lawyer, but a man who loves her and would do anything for her. And this Sebastian, well, I've worked with him. I've seen that he's not exactly a star. I don't know what he will bring to the case to which Susan gives all of herself, but that's their problem. It doesn't concern me anymore. These were the thoughts that plagued Alvin for quite some time after his dismissal. Why did he procrastinate and delay his confession when he had the opportunity to see his beloved woman almost daily? He explained it to himself honestly and very simply. He was afraid, but what would it be like? He, having barely got a job, where he was taken, most likely, just for a trial period, for an internship, and suddenly begins to explain in love, and who, the owner of the company, his boss, chic, business, but older than him in age, and also much more wealthy. What would one think of a guy who would dare to make such a confession? Will Susan not be offended by such a courtship? If she does not even chase him away immediately, will Alvin not become a laughingstock? A quick boy, our shooter has been everywhere, and got position, and a woman not the least, and all the firm in addition. Isn't that the kind of whispers he'd hear behind his back? Hear and waited that he could somehow show himself, to make an impression on his beloved. If she herself had looked at Alvin not just as an employee, but there were no signals from Susan in his direction. Alvin, of course, had found another job after his dismissal and even enjoyed success not only as an aspiring but capable professional, but also as a single man. Single women and girls paid attention to him, tried to impress him. But how were they to know that he looked at each one by comparing it to another, and in his eyes all women lose to Susan? It didn't matter that they were younger and more suited to his age. It didn't matter that they were single. They weren't Susan, and strangely enough, Alvin hadn't given up hope of still achieving this grown married woman. That is, he assumed that now Sebastian would somehow negatively prove himself, and that it would happen. Alvin had no doubt. And one day he had a chance to find out something about his happy rival. When he was dealing with a fraud case at his new job, he unexpectedly came across a familiar surname, Sebastian. True, he was a witness, but clearly had a much more serious relationship to the case, just to prove nothing. Alvin could not understand the case of 5 years ago. He lacked materials, or maybe experience, but he was interested in the case. Not only interested, alarmed, for if all was as he supposed, Susan was already in danger. And who can help her if his suspicions about her husband, who had unlimited access to all the affairs and finances of the firm? Not only that, but Susan's own safety is at risk. Fearful pictures painted the young man's imagination. He remembered everything he knew about Sebastian originally, that is, what he had told about himself and his past. From his words, everything was great. Brilliantly graduated from the institute, internship abroad, 10 years of impeccable work in a solid firm. Sebastian spoke vaguely about his personal life, except that he hinted at some tragedy, which left a heavy mark. Well, to check all this is not difficult. The check was not in vain. Sebastian had certainly graduated from the institute. The diploma was genuine, but here are the grades in it. Yes, this graduate was far from a red diploma. But further on there was such a confusion that Alvin could not figure it out on his own. Realizing that he had reached a dead end, he turned to an old friend, whom he considered his teacher. He met with him and stated his request. The friend looked at the initial data, asked, "What's this? Alvin is a private detective, has decided to become a private detective. What's this Sebastian you're so interested in?" "Yes, there, William, rather personal interest is involved, but I want to expose the villain." "I mean, everything is a lie. And for what purpose? A good person could get hurt. That's what I don't want. A woman?" William winked. "Well, don't blush like a girl, you're young. I'll try to find out what's going on with this young man through my channels. It didn't look like much at first. You can expect anything from a guy like that." It took a lot of time to find out the whole background of Sebastian. But when a friend invited Alvin to the cafe to tell him about the question of interest, it became clear that the young man was worried not in vain. "What a fruit! You gave me Alvin. Next to him not only your good man, but as if you and yourself in danger was not. I'll tell you one thing, your Sebastian didn't graduate from college for nothing." In the end, he learned to bury in a way that even Sterlitz would envy. So he worked after his studies in several firms and everywhere successfully, for his own pocket, but he almost always left like a goose out of water. Only at first, until he gained experience, or the wrong people ran into, even to the court case came to court, but even there the snake got out of it. So, 3 bankruptcies thanks to his activities, and all so neatly with white gloves. That's what I thought. Alvin sighed. "Yeah, wait a minute, those aren't his biggest sins. Firms, okay, he ruined those, he screwed those, but it happens, what can you do? He's not only that, he's also very unscrupulous in personal matters, which I think is even worse. Was he married?" Alvin asked coldly. "I wish. I tried not to bring it to that, though I had one marriage, but it was when I was young. Then I looked for ladies, rich ones, by interest, and then I left them, having taken something especially valuable. Here you go, one of them took her own life, after he had left her without money and an apartment. Another ran around the courts, but never got anything, and another one. Well, it's a murky story. After she met our client, she disappeared into thin air. What a nightmare. But why isn't he still in jail? Why? In the business part, he got away with it, but in personal matters, yes, he loved, then fell out of love. And the fact that it made someone else want to live, and someone else ran away, that's not a question for him. Money jewelry? You can prove he took it. He's got nothing on him, naked as a falcon. That's it. He can get away with it now. It's all on the account of his common-law wife, who's a nobody. No one knows how much she got. And now what? Alvin agonized over how he could save Susan now. And now what? Now he's clean as a whistle. He's officially employed by a reputable firm, married to the owner of the firm. I wouldn't give a dime for her life right now. There's a woman walking on a cliff like that. Is she the reason you brought it up? Yeah, Susan, but they've been married a year. But he's been sitting tight. Now he's gonna make a move. If this Susan means anything to you, you're gonna have to go to the rescue. But how do I know if she'll want to be saved? Alvin muttered to himself. Yes, you forgot the main thing. You tell her that she is not the only one he has so-and-so. He has a few years already, as they say now, a common-law wife. Well, that is, he has been with her for a long time and firmly, apparently, they have not only personal, but also business reciprocity. This girl works in a pharmacy as a pharmacist. She hasn't been caught for anything yet, but who knows? So I'd recommend not sitting at the table with him, just in case. Here are the coordinates of this great love of his. Just in case, ask around, it might come in handy. She just bought a car, by the way. And I doubt that on her pharmacist's salary, she does not deny herself anything. Alvin thanked his friend and left the cafe, completely dumbfounded by the information he had received. What to do now? How to save Susan? First of all, he decided to collect evidence, and for the sake of this he made a small surveillance of Sebastian. Now he knew the address of this civilian mistress in labor. It was not difficult. Soon Alvin had pictures of Sebastian helping the girl out of the car, walking with her under his arm, kissing her tenderly near the entrance. But what to do with it next? Just show Susan around. Meet up and tell her everything I've learned? Ask her to be more careful? Any of those actions might not accomplish the desired goal, and they could easily antagonize Alvin, but it was dangerous to hesitate, and he couldn't help but agree with his friend. As a result, he decided to call his former boss and say that he knew something about her husband. I'm sure she'll agree to meet, and it'll be easier to get it all out in private. Hello, Susan. This is Alvin, the lawyer you used to work for, remember? Of course, Alvin. Good afternoon. The woman wasn't exactly pleased, but she sounded friendly enough. Oh, this is about to change. How can I put this delicately? I'd like to meet you, Susan. I have some information that might interest you. What kind of information? Can you be more specific? The thing is, I'm running out of time, so I'd like to know how important it is. Very important, and above all, for your safety. I'd like to tell you about your husband, Sebastian. Believe me, he's not quite who he says he is. And who is he? With a scornful sneer, Susan asked. An American spy. The Ussuri tiger? Believe me, it's very serious. In a pleading tone, said Alvin. I have proof. What proof? She interrupted. The pictures? I've seen 100 of them. We have enough envious people besides you, but I didn't expect it from you. A young man, educated, well-mannered. Are you still angry about being fired? No one fired you. You left on your own. No, I didn't. That's not what I'm talking about, honestly. I'm begging you, why don't we meet? No, Alvin, I don't have time for meaningless meetings. I love my husband and trust him. Do you think he loves you? Alvin asked hopelessly. I don't think, I know. And I'll ask you not to call me anymore. I don't have time. Besides, this kind of talk makes me worry. Have a good day. And Susan interrupted the call. Why are we so unhappy? Unpleasant conversation? Sebastian walked into the office without knocking. I have to go to the bank to drop off some payments, so sign, Susan. You can do it yourself. Sebastian. Susan smiled strainedly as she signed the papers. Come on, you're the landlady. So who was on the phone, Ethan? Is he asking for an extension again? No, Alvin, your predecessor. Imagine he hasn't been able to settle down for a year. Suddenly he says he's got some information about something. It's crazy, in a word. He's probably stoned out of his mind. Well, I'm off. See you tonight, my love. Do you really love me? Susan smiled reassuringly. What do you think? I told you this morning I couldn't have fallen out of love in a couple of hours. I won't fall out of love in 100 years. Sebastian ran away. Susan moistened her eyes. What kind of people are these? Someone else's happiness is worse than cholera to them. That's what they think, and Alvin, and that friend. That she'll divorce her husband after hearing their gossip? No way. She feels that Sebastian loves her. And tomorrow is their anniversary, which they decided to celebrate together. Without any noise, she herself insisted. After all this evening, she will tell her favorite the main news. They will have a child, and Sebastian will be happy. They'll wipe the noses of all envious people. Alvin, having finished that conversation, sat helplessly, biting his lip. No, he was not going to retreat, to leave the woman he loved without help and protection. Susan was in danger, but she was not yet able to realize it. She loved her husband like those other, deceived, robbed women. But he will do anything to ensure that Susan is spared such grief. Yes, having ascertained everything, she will probably suffer a lot, cry, but she will be alive and well, and Sebastian, the scoundrel, will get nothing. Better still, if it were possible to put him on trial, he deserves it. So he'll go to Susan's office now, tell her everything he's learned from William. He'll show the photos, suggest a trip to the house of Sebastian's mistress, and he'd better catch the scoundrel there too. And then the poor woman will have no choice but to believe what he says. Yes, most likely it will not add sympathy to Alvin himself, but there was no such sympathy. So let it all stay as it was, and maybe sometime later she would realize who the real friend really was. He thought hopefully. With such thoughts, Alvin and moved towards the office, hoping to catch Susan in place and alone, not always Sebastian hanging around. He was in a hurry, rehearsing in his mind the forthcoming speech, but Machine, as always, carefully watched the road. Alvin never broke traffic rules, and this time, coming to an unregulated crossing, he was sure that he had done everything right. He looked at the road, it was empty. But suddenly, when he reached the middle of the road, a foreign car almost silently came out of nowhere, and then there was a tearing pain and darkness. None of this Susan knew, of course. She was preparing to celebrate not only the anniversary of their life together, but also another, much more important event that only she knew about. It was decided to celebrate in a small, cozy restaurant, just the two of them. Susan, with a discreet glow, waited for the moment when she could tell her husband about her pregnancy. They ordered. Susan was very fond of different seafood. She ordered the pasta with ideas. While waiting to order, she couldn't resist pulling a pregnancy test out of her purse. And here was my anniversary surprise, and was unpleasantly surprised by her husband's reaction, the joyful anticipation on his face, suddenly replaced by bewilderment and fear. "What is this test? You mean you're pregnant?" he asked without any enthusiasm. "Are you not happy?" Susan was surprised. Now it was her turn to be scared. "Come on, honey." Sebastian pulled himself together. "I'm happy. It's just so sudden. That's why I was surprised." "Well, I'm happy, my dear." "Of course I'm happy. I thought you were frightened." The woman said, offended. "Who wouldn't be? We are no longer young. The emergence of a child, it is a risk, above all for you. It's such a strain on the body." "No, don't think so. I'm not discouraging you." "I'm happy. It's just that at this stage, your health is more important to me than anything else." Sebastian's been very reassuring. "My health will be fine. Don't worry. I've already been to the doctor. Everything is fine. No complications are expected." "Well, thank God. Thank you for the good news on a day like this. I didn't expect it, really." The order came, but Susan went out first. She had to visit the ladies' room. and when she arrived, everything was ready. The couple began to celebrate. Not surprisingly, all the talk centered around Susan's pregnancy. Is that why you ordered the juice? I was wondering why you wouldn't even have your favorite wine. You have to eat for two now, and you're right. Seafood is the best thing for the baby. Aren't you sick? Oh, come on, Sebastian. It's okay, I told you. I'm just pregnant. It's no big deal. Yeah, the flavor's different. I feel like every dish tastes unfamiliar. Yeah, well, I've read about that. I don't know which book. This woman thought all the food was too bland. Would you like some salt? Or would you like some seasoning? No, not at all. Oh, I just said I was fine, and then I jinxed it. I feel dizzy and stuffy. Why don't you pay and let's eat? Wait, it's so nice here. Breathe deeply, drink some water. Or do you want a sip of wine? It won't hurt, but you'll feel better. No, I want to go home. Shall we eat? I don't feel well. Susan was already feeling very ill indeed and was surprised that her husband, who had just been so concerned about her health, was sitting so indifferently, looking at her not sympathetically, but as if testing her. Sit down, don't spoil the evening. In Sebastian's voice there was a cold chuckle, but his voice came out as if through absorbent cotton. Everything was blurring in front of her eyes. Susan tried to get up, but her legs buckled, and she fell as if she had dived into some suffocating blackness. An ambulance was called, and Susan was taken unconscious to the hospital, where she was immediately admitted to the intensive care unit. Only the next morning, the woman regained consciousness. She remembered everything, the restaurant, the seafood. I'm sure she's poisoned. That's why I thought the flavor of those mussels was so weird. I'm gonna sue that restaurant. Oh my God, my baby. The doctor came in, checked her reactions, calmed her down. There's no further danger to her health. It was a serious poisoning, and you're lucky the doctors were called quickly and responded appropriately. And that you didn't drink alcohol, or they wouldn't have been able to save you in time. But your child was less fortunate. You unfortunately lost him. How? That can't be true. I needed that child so badly. Is it because of the Dan mussels? I'm afraid the mussels had nothing to do with it. The doctor shook his head. I have already informed the police. A rare and dangerous poison has been found in your stomach. When your condition stabilizes, an investigator will come to see you. What condition? What investigator? My baby. Oh my God, I've been waiting for him. And Sebastian? She realized. Is my husband here? Did he poison himself too? No, he didn't come. And I think he's fine. Don't worry. Susan had nothing to worry about. Her long-awaited child would never be born. Here's Sebastian. Why doesn't he come? Yeah, well, they probably just won't let him in the ICU. They'll move him to the ward, and they'll see each other. She was transferred to the ward the next day, but the first thing that came was not her husband, but the investigator with his questions about whether she had any enemies. What enemies? Not the waiters, not the cooks. No one knew I was going to be in this restaurant. Susan exclaimed, and Sebastian suddenly stood before her eyes. He looked at her, questioningly, and urged her, "Have a sip of wine. Let's sit down. Don't spoil the evening." So he wanted to keep her in the restaurant, wanted to aggravate her condition? But that can't be. Sebastian is her husband. He loves her. He was happy about the baby. And what did Alvin say about the danger? Why does Sebastian not come? For if they saw each other, all doubts would be shattered. She felt sick again and interrupted the investigator with an irritated question. Are you trying to get the restaurant workers off your back? It's clear that I poisoned myself with their seafood. It tasted weird to me right away. The remnants of the dish you didn't eat were sent for examination. They were found to contain poison. The investigator sighed. It had nothing to do with the mussels or the rest of the food. Susan dialed her husband's number, but he didn't answer. Probably busy or driving to my place. Hopefully, the woman thought. But Sebastian did not arrive, and his phone was subsequently turned off. There was no strength to think about what it meant. Her condition improved, but then again she felt sick and weak, depressed, and sometimes unable to get out of bed. Only after 2 weeks, Susan felt that she could get up, walk, live on. And everything would clear up with Sebastian, probably, because he couldn't have disappeared without a trace. She looked out the window. The weather was beautiful. I should at least go out to the garden, get some air. This atmosphere is making me feel worse, she thought. She sighed, smoothed her hair a little, smoothed her hospital gown, and cautiously went down the stairs. At the first moment, the fresh spring air almost drowned her out. Susan wanted to ask someone to walk her to her room, but changed her mind. It's nothing, I'll just stand, breathe and come to my senses. I have to get used to the air of freedom and independence. There would be no one to pick me up from the hospital. She had already realized that Sebastian must have abandoned her. It was up to the investigators to determine how much he was to blame for what had happened. Susan did feel better, and she wandered slowly down the path, enjoying the rays of the sun, the pictures of waking nature. She didn't want to think about bad things, but nothing good came into her head, so she enjoyed the peace and thoughtlessness. The other patients were wandering the street, some alone, some apparently with relatives who had arrived. Suddenly her gaze caught on some familiar face, Alvin. It was he who strode hesitantly toward her, leaning on crutches, with his plastered leg out in front of him. She had been thinking of this young man recently. "Alvin?" Susan exclaimed. "How are you here?" The young man looked at her at first, as if not recognizing her. Then he perked up. "Susan, are you ill?" "I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you at first." "I am." He nodded at his leg. "Car accident, second day back on the road, learning a new means of transportation." "What about you?" "You've lost so much weight. And me, Alvin, I got poisoned." "You warned me, and I did." Talking to a man who looked at her kindly and sympathetically made her voice break. The tears themselves flowed from her eyes. "Come on, Susan. Let's sit down on the bench and tell me what happened." "Is it your husband?" "I don't know yet, Alvin." Sitting down on the bench, Susan replied, "The investigators are still looking into it, but judging by the fact that my husband hasn't shown up or called in 2 weeks, you were right. I understand the investigators can't find him either. They're on him though, right?" "That's good. Can you give me your investigator's cell phone number?" "Or he can have mine. I really need to talk to him. I already know something about your husband." "Yes, of course you do. I can't tell you anything. I'm so clumsy. Love is in my eyes, but he loves me. In the meantime, Alvin, tell me what you know. And one more thing. I'm sorry I didn't believe you that day. Who knows? If I'd agreed to see you, we'd both be well. No one can know that, but why don't we go to the ward or the lobby? It's getting fresh. You don't need a cold." They sat down in the lobby. Alvin began to tell everything he knew about Sebastian, about his previous jobs, about his relationships with women, and about the fact that he still had a mistress. "A friend told me he's an investigator. He found out everything. I was horrified. I rushed to you. That is, I called you first, but it's clear that you didn't believe me. I thought I'd come and show you the photos. Although you said you'd already seen it all, but everyone can't lie, especially since the investigator was here. So it's already a fact. Now I don't know what to believe anymore. I wish none of this ever happened, including the meeting with Sebastian. Then why did I go to that high school friends' night? Tell me something else. Why did you find out about Sebastian? Did you have something against him? Or did you find out something bad before? Before I knew you, Susan, I fell in love with you. Don't you get it? Alvin finally decided to speak up. Yes, at first sight and forever. Now I'm cursing myself for not admitting it sooner. I mean, I should have quit my job first, and then I should have confessed, wooed, pursued. And then maybe there wouldn't have been a Sebastian. It's nothing, I'll just stand, breathe and come to my senses. I have to get used to the air of freedom and independence. There would be no one to pick me up from the hospital. She had already realized that Sebastian must have abandoned her. It was up to the investigators to determine how much he was to blame for what had happened. Susan did feel better, and she wandered slowly down the path, enjoying the rays of the sun, the pictures of waking nature. She didn't want to think about bad things, but nothing good came into her head, so she enjoyed the peace and thoughtlessness. The other patients were wandering the street, some alone, some apparently with relatives who had arrived. Suddenly her gaze caught on some familiar face, Alvin. It was he who strode hesitantly toward her, leaning on crutches, with his plastered leg out in front of him. She had been thinking of this young man recently. "Alvin?" Susan exclaimed. "How are you here?" The young man looked at her at first, as if not recognizing her. Then he perked up. "Susan, are you ill?" "I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you at first." "I am." He nodded at his leg. "Car accident, second day back on the road, learning a new means of transportation." "What about you?" "You've lost so much weight. And me, Alvin, I got poisoned. You warned me, and I did." Talking to a man who looked at her kindly and sympathetically made her voice break. The tears themselves flowed from her eyes. "Come on, Susan. Let's sit down on the bench and tell me what happened. Is it your husband?" "I don't know yet, Alvin." Sitting down on the bench, Susan replied, "The investigators are still looking into it, but judging by the fact that my husband hasn't shown up or called in 2 weeks, you were right." "I understand the investigators can't find him either. They're on him though, right? That's good. Can you give me your investigator's cell phone number? Or he can have mine. I really need to talk to him. I already know something about your husband." "Yes, of course you do. I can't tell you anything. I'm so clumsy. Love is in my eyes, but he loves me. In the meantime, Alvin, tell me what you know. And one more thing. I'm sorry I didn't believe you that day. Who knows? If I'd agreed to see you, we'd both be well. No one can know that, but why don't we go to the ward or the lobby? It's getting fresh. You don't need a cold." They sat down in the lobby. Alvin began to tell everything he knew about Sebastian, about his previous jobs, about his relationships with women, and about the fact that he still had a mistress. "A friend told me, he's an investigator, he found out everything. I was horrified. I rushed to you, that is. I called you first, but it's clear that you didn't believe me. I thought I'd come and show you the photos. Although you said you'd already seen it all, but everyone can't lie, especially since the investigator was here. So it's already a fact. Now I don't know what to believe anymore. I wish none of this ever happened, including the meeting with Sebastian. Then why did I go to that high school friends' night? Tell me something else. Why did you find out about Sebastian? Did you have something against him? Or did you find out something bad before? Before I knew you, Susan, I fell in love with you. Don't you get it?" Alvin finally decided to speak up. "Yes, at first sight and forever. Now I'm cursing myself for not admitting it sooner. I mean, I should have quit my job first, and then I should have confessed, wooed, pursued, and then maybe there wouldn't have been a Sebastian. Alvin? Susan, who had suspected something like that before, but thought it was just a normal youthful interest in a mature woman, was astonished. But what are you talking about? I'm much older than you. It's just indecent. What's indecent? Love? No, whatever you want, but you're the only one for me for all time. What's age got to do with it? Men get old sooner, and now we look the same age. Ask anyone. So right now you, Susan, look half my age. A fragile, confused little girl next to an old man on crutches. But even so, I'll always protect and support you. Oh, Alvin, you have no idea how grateful I am for such words, and for everything you've done for me, but I assure you, your infatuation will soon pass. All young guys fall in love with older women, a lot of them. And it's important for women not to imagine things because it's so painful to be disappointed. I've been in love for almost 3 years. Is that not an argument? You married someone your own age and what? Didn't you get any disappointments? Alvin shouted, but then he realized it. I'm sorry, Susan. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I mean to remind you of something you'd rather forget. I'm not offended, Alvin. The truth is not offended, but let's forget your confession. It's not worth it. I'll never forget it. No, I'm not gonna run, jump, after you on my 3 legs. I realize you're not in the mood for that right now, but you should know that I'm always here to help you with whatever you need. I'm glad I could admit it. I'm sorry, Alvin, that I can't do anything to answer your confession. Susan said tiredly. I'll call the investigator tomorrow morning, tell him about you, give him your phone number. You have no idea how grateful I am for everything, and for your confession too. Now let's go to our rooms, or the nurses will lose us. I'll probably be discharged in a few days, but we'll see each other again, won't we? I hope so. I realize we don't have time for all that right now, but I don't think you'll be able to stop me limping someday. Maybe walking with a cane will make me look respectable. Alvin smiled. Susan returned his smile, though she looked a wreck herself. That night, she hadn't slept well, all the while remembering Alvin's words, his confused, sometimes belittling look. After what had happened, would I ever believe anyone? Even this boy who seemed so sincere? He's done so much for me. But even if he's not cheating now, the time will come in. No, I can't take another loss, she thought. The next day, Susan was discharged. She went to say goodbye to Alvin, said she had given the investigator his words and phone number, and there was no further conversation between them. I'm in a hurry now, Alvin. I have a lot of things to fix in my life and at work. But we know each other's coordinates. I hope we'll meet again and talk. I really hope so, answered Alvin. He took her hand, but did not shake it, but kissed it gently. Susan, unexpectedly for herself, bent down and kissed the young man on the head, then straightened up and walked away without looking back. She really had a lot to do. She called the office and asked them to send a car to pick her up. When she got home, she cleaned herself up in an hour, trying to wash away the hospital odors and all the worries of the last few days. Now she had to be businesslike, decisive, and strong. Walking through the apartment, Susan saw that Sebastian had already moved most of his things out. Well, that's good. Less worries, less memories. And hopefully he wouldn't come back. We should change the locks, she was thinking. And the rest of the stuff in the garbage bag and put it in the dumpster. But that could be done later. But for now she had to go to work, find out what was going on. Sebastian was making some kind of super favorable deal. We'd have to see how it turned out. She got there just in time, that is. She had already missed a lot of things. During the year of her almost reign in the firm, Sebastian had managed to slowly transfer quite substantial sums to his account. But all the claims were signed by you. What could I do? The accountant said dejectedly, I tried to inform you, but somehow you didn't pay attention. Yes, of course. No one blames you, Susan replied. She also looked at the plans for the new deal, which seemed intended to be a surprise for the wedding anniversary. Fortunately, the surprise didn't work out. With new sober eyes, Susan saw that the deal was not only unprofitable, it would be ruinous. Sebastian decided to transfer almost all the money to the account of a front company, apparently registered in the name of his mistress. Susan was in time. She managed to revoke the power of attorney and prevent this transaction from taking place. But what Sebastian had stolen, well, what can you do? There's no way to get the money back. But he'll have to answer for what he's done, and his mistress probably will too. It's unlikely he got the poison himself and poured it into her muscles. The next day, Susan went to the investigator, wrote a statement against her husband, accusing him of theft, fraud, and possible poisoning. She realized it would be difficult to prove anything, but her husband's past should have motivated law enforcement to track him down and try to prevent at least future crimes. This time the police, who had long tried to tie this man to any real crime, were quick to act. Sebastian and his mistress were detained at the airport. They already thought that the deed was done. Only happiness awaited them further, and the detention was a very unpleasant surprise. After all, they were already ready to celebrate their victory, anticipating a rich and happy life abroad. Yes, that Susan was still alive was a setback. Oh, Sebastian, I told you we should have kept her in the restaurant as long as possible and talked her into a drink, but I'm worried. Who knew that old fool would get knocked up? She's almost 40. A decent woman should be babysitting grandchildren at that age. Anyway, I called the hospital. They said she's in serious condition. I don't think she has time for that now. Well, everything's fine, and we'll be happy and free soon. The main thing is to get the principal into my account on time. Just during this conversation, the police approached the couple and asked them to follow them. How Sebastian did not rage, shouting that the boarding of their plane had already been announced. How his mistress did not beg him to let her go at least, as she has nothing to do with this man. Both were detained and taken to the detention center. Sebastian, outraged by the betrayal of his mistress, was not going to vindicate her. What a bastard you are, Lara, he shouted. You have no relation then. That's the man I've become. You want to blame it on me? Well, don't. What did you get my money for? What money? What else are you thinking? You planned the whole thing. You turned it around, and now it's my fault. No way. You can't put me away for nothing. The bickering continued at the confrontations, tiring the investigators to no end. However, thanks to these mutual accusations, a lot of information on the merits of the case became known. The role of Lara in the affairs of Sebastian, the degree of guilt in the poisoning of Susan became clear. Did you really mean to kill your wife? Asked the investigator, who had seen a lot of things in his life. Aha, I lived with her for a year and I wanted to. If I'd wanted to, she'd have been dead in a week. I wasn't even going to get a divorce. I could still use her. It was that snake. How did I know what she gave me in the bottle? She said Susan would just pass out and forget things, make it easier for her to manage. Don't listen to him anymore. Lara sobbed. He begged me to give him something to make that fool go away. I told you not to pour out too much, half the visor only. and then she'd just get a little sick, and he'd transfer all the money to himself while his wife was in the hospital and go far away. He was the one who decided to pour it all out, especially since she was already pregnant. Susan really wanted to meet her husband, and the opportunity came, also in the investigator's office. The woman looked bitterly at the man she had loved so much in her youth and recently. After all, she thought that she would live with this man all her life, that they would be happy. "Tell me only one thing, Sebastian. How could you?" she asked, no longer hoping for an intelligible answer. "I could what?" "You couldn't. That's why I'm sitting here now." The man grinned. "That's not what I mean. You killed your child." "What baby? Did I ask you for one? Have you thought about whether I need a child?" "What do you mean you asked for it?" "Marriage is about having children." "No, but I still thought you were smarter than that." "What marriage? What kids? Now you think we had a bourgeois marriage. We had a union of interests. You got your share of happiness at your age, and I got my share of money. And if you hadn't been such an impenetrable fool, we would have parted too, to our mutual satisfaction. You should be grateful to me now that I got rid of that baby. An elderly single mother, wouldn't you agree, is not the best character." Sebastian looked at her defiantly and mockingly. "You were after me on purpose, weren't you? What if I hadn't come to the class reunion then? You've got a lot on your mind, sweetheart. I didn't even know about you. Well, you came along, so what's to miss? If it wasn't you, it would have been someone else. How many of you fools, who in the pursuit of money at 40 years old, remember that it would be nice to get married? You want love, and I'm a kind man. Give you love, but you have to pay for everything so that I could provide everything for the one I really loved. You could work. You had an education, right? So I worked as hard as I could. For you, working means working hard, letting life pass you by. But some people have other interests. So you dragged your sweetheart into it. You'll both go to jail now. Isn't that what you call life passing you by?" Susan still couldn't understand what he was looking for. "Well, we'll sit. We'll do time, but we'll get out. They won't give us a life sentence. Don't worry about us, honey. Worry about yourself now. You'll spend the rest of your life alone." Susan was not going to appeal to his conscience. There was no point in appealing to such people. "Well, you're not afraid of the court. You're not afraid of prison. But there's another court, God's court, and there's a harsher sentence waiting for you." But this apparently did not frighten Sebastian at all. At these words, he simply laughed in the face of the woman who loved him so sincerely. She learned more about his pranks during the investigation. Yes, she is not the first victim of her lover. Such numbers he has done before. In recent years, he really paired with Lara, his accomplice, whose education and place of work allowed to neutralize in time, trusted women, slipping them various drugs. He could not achieve a stable income through work because he had failed in his profession. He studied with difficulty, and at the first place of work he showed himself so that he got into the unofficial blacklist. The first serious check, it could easily reveal. But Susan herself brought him to her company, so the personnel department accepted him without any checks. A friend of the missus. What are you talking about? As a result, Sebastian, for 2 years of work, managed to conclude several fake contracts, very even decent to heat his hands. And only Susan, blinded by love, did not see it, almost paid for it with her life and lost, perhaps, the only opportunity to become a mother. Now she remembered all the little bells that could have prevented the final tragedy. Not even bells, but bells rattling. Still she remained deaf, blind. Poor Alvin. He had warned her, and she had told Sebastian everything. Wasn't that why the boy was still in the hospital? maybe that accident wasn't an accident either. Alvin was in the hospital. Susan visited regularly. He was recovering quickly from his injury, although the doctors warned that the limp might be permanent. He and Alvin had become real friends, though the young man clearly wanted a more important place in her life. But Susan still felt only gratitude to him, both for trying to ward off trouble and for helping the investigation because of his feelings, which seemed to resonate in her soul. She herself felt younger, lighter, being near Alvin. Sometimes it seemed to her that it was because of his love that she managed to be young and attractive, though she couldn't forget about the age difference. Yes, it happens that a woman of years falls in love with young people, even marries, but it's afterward, for while they are still happy as never before. Anyone can fall out of love and old and ugly, but why not let yourself be happy for as long as you can? I was happy with Sebastian too, even though it didn't last long, even though it ended so horribly, so disgustingly. But it won't be like that with Alvin. He's already proved his integrity. However, I have every reason to shun all men from now on. Then I should get a cat, sterilize it, and live together without fear that it would run away and live to a ripe old age all alone. And if I did decide to do something, I still have time to give birth to a child. Yes, I will be an elderly loner, but still a mother, not a hollow flower. So she thought, returning after another meeting with Alvin to her lonely apartment, from which, along with Sebastian's things, seemed to have disappeared and the memory of him. Alvin would sometimes start talking about his love again when they met, but Susan would stop him. If he did not try to start this conversation again, she became a little sad. I guess my Alvin got cold feet. Oh well, that's good. It's good for him and me. But the next time, it just kept happening. And Susan stopped again. Come on, Alvin. You'll meet a nice girl soon. You'll love her. Already met and loved. The young man replied firmly. Even before the trial, Susan filed for divorce to finally cut the scoundrel out of her life. She told Alvin about it when she came to meet him from the hospital. The boy was still walking with a cane, though otherwise fully recovered. They were both to attend the trial, both as witnesses and victims. The trial was a very serious one, involving some previous cases that had remained unsolved, and it soon became clear that Sebastian and his fake girlfriend would not only get away with it, but would receive the maximum punishment. Do you have any regrets about the way things turned out? I mean, about Sebastian. Susan asked Alvin as he walked out of the courthouse after a hearing. I feel sorry for myself for being such an uncommonly stupid person. Believing what? To whom? Not only did I get hurt, lose my baby, but I embarrassed myself. And why feel sorry for him? He knew what he was doing. There's no shame in falling in love. I love you and I'll always love you, even if you send me away for good. I'm not going to send you away. On the contrary, I want you back. My firm is without a lawyer, and he has enough work. Will you come? Susan smiled. You bet. If you asked me to be a janitor, to clean your entrance, I'd love to go. It would be a reason to see each other every day. And give me bouquets and coffee? Don't say no. I know whose job it was. Especially since you got fired, no one's done that. I'll give them to you every day if you let me. No, that's not necessary. We're not going to make people laugh. Susan smiled. So they started working together again. Well, everything is back to normal. Alvin thought. The only difference is that I confessed my love, but I got something like, my nose isn't big enough. But how do I convince her I'm serious? How do I get her to trust me? To love me? Alvin thought lost in thought. They often talked to each other, both at work and afterwards, sometimes going to cafes together after the end of the work day. Soon the trial of Sebastian and Lara took place. It was 6 months after the incident. Arrogance, bravado, sarcasm, all flew off this couple, only to find out that the jokes are over in terms and they are waiting for real and not insignificant. And so, in fact, it turned out. After the verdict, Alvin and Susan went to a restaurant to celebrate the end of a long, all-studied case. I don't know, Alvin, maybe it's a sin to be happy about it, but I can't help it. I'm not so much rejoicing as celebrating the release from the nightmare, from the lies I've been living for the last year. And I really, really hope that nothing like this will never happen again in my life. I don't even want happiness. I just want release from the nightmare. I'm so tired, if you only knew. And so grateful to you for being there for me. I'm sorry I didn't believe you right away. I didn't pay attention to what you said. It would have been funny if you believed me right off the bat. Besides, I could be wrong, but I'm still the party that wants you to be okay and not have him around. And I believe you'll be very happy. I want to make you happy. No, seriously. Susan, is there any hope for me? Do I? Can I hope that for at least 5 years your feelings won't change? No, wait, don't say anything. 5 years is nothing, but they'll flow differently for us. You'll mature into a serious, solid man, and I'll be 5 years older. Oh, you again? I told you, it doesn't matter. Alvin was very tense as he decided to finally clear the air about the relationship. If Susan and this time will answer with a refusal, citing the age difference, he did not know what to do. Just get out of her life, not to annoy with his confessions and himself, and not to torment in vain hopes. Yes, that would probably be the best course of events. How many rejections do you get? They do. Susan crumpled her napkin nervously. Marry me? Alvin took the ring box out of his pocket and placed it on the table in front of her. I can't live with this uncertainty anymore. Either say yes or say no definitively, and I won't bring it up again. The woman, with slightly trembling fingers, took the box, opened it, and admired the ring with the red stone. Yes, Alvin, yes. I'll save the peace and freedom for later. Okay? Let's say we live another 5 years. For the sake of 5 years of happiness, I can risk 5 years with a man who I can see loves me and whom I also love. Alvin walked around the table, approached Susan, kissed her on the lips for the first time. The company at the next table broke into applause. Other visitors joined them. Congratulations and wishes of happiness flowed, and a few months later Susan and Alvin celebrated their wedding, attended by all their colleagues who also sincerely wished happiness to the young people. They did look very happy indeed, and were so. No age difference was noticeable, and Susan herself did not think about how old she was. It was the first year of her real life, and that year ended with an even happier event. Susan had given birth to a son, a healthy, beautiful boy. All the failures and misfortunes of the past could be forgotten, as could the age difference between the parents. Susan was at last completely happy and no longer thought of her years. She had more to think about than just some numbers.